6 years before Larian's Baldur's Gate 3 came out and set a new standard for the isometric CRPG genre, Larian's Divinity Original Sin 2 came out and set a new standard for the isometric CRPG genre. It wasn't the overwhelming blockbuster that Baldur's ended up being, but by the niche standards of its genre, it was still quite the hit in its day, earning critical acclaim, financial success, a dedicated fanbase, and even the license to make Baldur's in the first place. I first played Original Sin 2 right in between its release and the release of Baldur's Gate 3, and I found it quite overrated. The game was really fun to play, but the story did not work for me, and RPGs are the story genre, so that matters. Though with hindsight, maybe Divinity Original Sin 2 and I started off on the wrong foot. See, I played it after Pillars of Eternity 2, and while I liked Pillars 2 a lot and remain a shameless Obsidian shill, I knew that at least one of my problems with that game, the reduction of party size from 6 to 5, was a direct result of Obsidian chasing Larian's success and deciding that simplifying possible gameplay confusion with fewer party members to keep track of in combat was one way to do it. But I like having a lot of companions at once to maximize how many characters I can get to know at the same time, and how many of them are available to interject in dialogue or have banter with each other. So Pillars 2 was changed in a way that I mildly disliked, specifically because it was trying to be more like this other game that was way more successful. So I started Original Sin 2 already with a bone to pick, and now I worry I may have been unfair. I was reflecting on this when making my CRPG narrative tier list a while ago. I feel like I'm going to get flack for this, but I did not really connect with this game's story very much. The plot of the game is you have to go around building up your power and acquiring more and more energy, source energy for yourself, and without trying to give too much away, the best ending is about giving up that power, and I do like that idea. Articulating it that way, there is more to the game thematically than I think I felt when I was originally playing it. I don't know. No, you know what? No promises, but I might make an analysis video on this just to give myself the excuse to give it another chance. Well, that thought kept nagging at me, and then I decided to go ahead and do it. Divinity Original Sin 2 does have a pretty unique narrative approach and interesting core ideas, and it's worth taking seriously, though, even now, after finding more to appreciate, I still think it falls apart by the end. I interpret Original Sin 2 as, for the most part, a borderline anarchistic critique against the very nature of power. Gathering power, this game seems to say, requires moral compromise and is ultimately not actually how evil can be permanently defeated. True victory can only be won by rejecting and eliminating power. For all that traditional fantasy settings crib from The Lord of the Rings, it's not as often we see so overt an alignment with one of Tolkien's core themes, a deep suspicion of power and rejection of the idea that evil power can be wielded for good. And like Lord of the Rings, while the magical stand-in for the horrors of power is rejected by the narrative, more mundane political power remains intact by the end, which one could argue risks undermining these themes. But I'd say Lord of the Rings is overall a strong enough work to withstand this contradiction, while Original Sin 2 is not, and instead suffers from major thematic collapse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get there, eventually. What's the runtime on this one? In Divinity Original Sin 2, the big symbol for the allure, danger, and evil of power is what's called source energy, the energy of life in the series setting Rivellon. I have to admit unfamiliarity with how source is treated in other Divinity games, since Original Sin 2 is the only one I've played. This means there are almost certainly things about this game that didn't work for me that are more due to me jumping into the series in its 7th installment and lacking proper context than being true faults of this specific game. On the other hand, my understanding of the series is that continuity tends to be pretty loose, and each game is designed and advertised to stand on its own anyway. My point is that regardless of how source may or may not be treated in other games, Original Sin 2 uses it much like how Lord of the Rings uses the One Ring, except Boromir's perspective, let's just use it to fix things, is omnipresent amongst the characters. So this game digs into the flaws with that mindset, and how people seek power despite the problems it causes, and then fumbles this at the end. That's the first major observation I'll be exploring in this video. The secondary observation is that in a post-Baldur's Gate 3 world, a lot of this game feels like a trial run for things Larian would learn how to do much better in that game. The writing here is mostly far inferior to what Larian would do later, especially with regards to characterization, and yet these themes about power end up feeling like they're handled in a more nuanced and sophisticated way than Baldur's Gate 3's more emotionally complex but intellectually simple treatment of authority. It kind of seems like Larian traded Original Sin 2's more interesting core idea and plot for Baldur's Gate 3's richer and more complex characters. That trade-off ended up being worth it, in more ways than one, but it's a bit of a shame it was made at all. Divinity Original Sin 2 is a very mixed bag in terms of its narrative, so let's open the bag up and start pulling stuff out, looking for the source of that weird smell that's coming out of it. I'll be talking about what works for me and what doesn't, both major things and more minor things that I would admittedly be more willing to overlook or brush past if I felt more positive overall. Such is the tendency of the fallible human critic. Not liking a thing broadly makes one more willing to poke at smaller stuff, but liking a thing makes the smaller stuff feel insignificant. If by the end you feel there's something I still missed, or you have reasons why something worked for you that didn't for me, I'd be very curious to see your thoughts in the comments. And also like, subscribe, turn notifications on if you want to see more, and huge thanks to my generous Patreon supporters and YouTube members. And also one last thing before properly starting. As I've done before, I'd like to shout out a small indie game that is not technically a sponsor because I was not paid to talk about it, but the developer did send it to me and I thought it was cool. Lohse is a short, aesthetically striking point-and-click adventure game about exploring a strange undersea society. The world and characters are fun, the atmosphere is great, and I found it unexpectedly engaging to pull out an actual notepad and pencil to do fish algebra to solve some of the puzzles. I really enjoyed my time with it, so check it out if you think it looks cool. Though if the kind of puzzles where you do have to break out scratch paper and physically write notes isn't your thing, then fair enough. Okay, let's actually begin. Full spoilers for Divinity Original Sin 2, and vague spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3. Right up top, I want to describe two intentional stylistic choices of Divinity Original Sin 2 that I firmly disagree with and that go against the kind of RPG design that I like. Both of these are things that Baldur's Gate 3 did not carry over, to my great relief. I suppose we'll see in the future if this is because Larian wanted to better conform to the style of the prior Baldur's Gate games, or because they ended up agreeing with me that these choices don't work. The first such choice is writing dialogue options mostly in second person rather than first person. I find this distancing, creating an extra barrier between you and the things you're making your character say, even as the actual words are saying you are doing this. It's an odd choice for a game genre that typically tries to dissolve the boundaries between player and player character more than others. Even in RPGs where you play as a more strictly predefined, non-customizable character, they tend to be designed to still make you feel like you are speaking as them when you select their dialogue by writing the options as direct quotes. Second-person descriptions are usually reserved for taking action instead of saying something. Even in later BioWare games with the dialogue wheel, the options are concisely paraphrased, but still in first person. With Original Sin 2, all the dialogue options are written as the narrator indirectly summarizing what you're saying to someone else. While maybe this was done to try to emulate how a DM might describe a situation to you in a physical tabletop game, it feels more to me like when such a game is dealing with uninvested players, with situations like the DM saying something along the lines of, "The shady bartender glares at you and says, 'You sure are asking a lot of questions about things normal folk ought not to care about,' and then the player just says, 'I threaten him into telling me what I want to know,' and doesn't engage with any of the theatrics. It feels lame. Now, if you see the same conversation while controlling different characters, and you compare lines of dialogue from companions when they're NPCs as opposed to the lines as they appear when you're controlling them and see them as dialogue options, it turns out that the summarized lines are mostly the same as the more direct lines anyway. And in the occasional designated "you and companions react to something" situations, you do get first-person options. To me, that just makes the choice of second-person writing for most of the options even more baffling. Why insist on this distancing? The other major creative decision I dislike is that at the end of the first act, after you escape the Island of Reaper's Eye and are intercepted by the main villains, any companions not actively in your party will die for the rest of the game, showing up later on as glorified cameos, but otherwise having their personal arcs aborted. I think if this were a shorter, more reactive and replayable RPG like Tyranny, I wouldn't be so nearly annoyed by this, and perhaps even applaud the boldness of forcing a degree of party exclusivity based on player choice. But Original Sin 2 is over 100 hours, and as I'll discuss, I don't think the companions are good enough to justify replaying the whole thing specifically to see the quest lines you miss. However, their perspectives are unique enough to make their absences in arcs related to them notable, and also the way the companions die feels arbitrary and unearned. They just drop dead anticlimactically, off-screen, when Malady pulls the ship into the Hall of Echoes, purely because in the metagame you didn't pick them. I guess if they had a scripted death during the preceding combat, a player might keep trying to reload to save them, but at least they would have had a clear death scene. As it is now, it just feels like the game is closing off major plot threads in service of short-term shock, removing important perspectives that otherwise could help build a full picture of the world and story. And again, I can imagine this being done in a bold and interesting way to make a point about, say, the inability to have a full perspective on life, or that we're not the kind of great hero who can save everyone in this game. Original Sin 2 does not feel like it is doing this to make those points. It just feels like it's making the main party and overall narrative worse to impose FOMO for more replays. Well, I resent that FOMO. I wish I didn't have such a disconnect from the Dwarven plotline because Beast wasn't there to anchor it emotionally. I wish I didn't feel obligated to play one of the origin characters just to make sure that I was only missing out on 2 major plot lines instead of 3. And sure, that may be a self-imposed obligation. Maybe that doesn't bother you, but this is my video. So these 2 creative choices differentiate the game from other isometric RPGs, but as far as my own preferences are concerned, they do so for the worse. I suspect, though don't know for sure, they might both be results of building the game around its multiplayer experience. Each character in the party is the chosen of a different god, and in the story they are told by their gods to compete with each other for the right to ascend to divinity. They also sometimes get contradictory personal objectives, like Red Prince wanting to talk to Stingtail in Fort Joy while Sebille wants to kill him. To be sure, the idea of a competitive RPG where players are outright told to backstab each other is very cool, but it's difficult to get invested in an RPG story if your first time experiencing it is with a friend chatting in your ear alongside you the whole time. And I suspect awareness of this ended up causing Larian to deprioritize things like characterful companion dialogue, and maybe this also contributed to the second-person dialogue options. But once again, this game is long, making it difficult to reliably sustain a full multiplayer playthrough. So it feels like Original Sin 2 made certain sacrifices to the single-player experience to facilitate a multiplayer experience that most who play this game will only try as a novelty for maybe part of Act 1 until someone gets too busy to continue or loses interest in a plot they're only half paying attention to. This is something avoided for Baldur's Gate 3, which works great as a single-player game and has multiplayer as a fun bonus. I don't claim to know for sure that Larian wanted Original Sin 2 to primarily be a multiplayer game, just that it feels like that's the case, especially with the Nameless Isle climax. Now, with those broader complaints out of the way, let's get chronological. If you've played Baldur's Gate 3 and not Divinity Original Sin 2, let me know if the following sounds familiar to you. You begin the game as a prisoner on a ship, but a monster attack causes the ship to crash in the first major area of the game. You wake up on a beach and start gathering a team of misfit companions as an entity begins speaking to you and urging you to develop a powerful but potentially dangerous and harmful ability. Along the way, you realize that a conspiracy in the service of an evil god you never directly confront has been pulling strings to subvert society and empower itself. The journey culminates in you reaching one of the setting's main cities, which is under the protection of one of the evil god's main servants currently presenting himself as its savior. The similarities are strongest with the very beginning and the fact that the last act is in a city. The specifics and other plot beats are actually quite different, so calling the whole games the same is a stretch, but the prologues are so alike they beg for direct comparison. Now I actually have quite a few good things to say about the plot of this game, even alongside several criticisms, but comparing the tutorial prisoner ships does not work out in Original Sin 2's favor. The big drawback here is how the companions are introduced. Original Sin 2 gives you all meet in a behind-a-bar-type intro exchanges with everybody in rapid succession in this prison ship galley, quickly establishing each of them, but none being given the space to breathe, and most coming across as flat archetypes. While the cinematic presentation surely helps Baldur's make a stronger impression, the fact that the companion introductions are more spaced out and given more individual focus also helps. So even though Original Sin 2's opening does not have plot holes like, wait, how did Will and Karlach get on the Nautiloid exactly, it does have weaker companion writing, which will continue for the entire rest of the game, and fighting through the Nautiloid is more dynamic than fighting the Voidwoken that appear on the Merryweather. Some of this can, again, be laid at the feet of the more cinematic presentation of Baldur's, but also just on a visual design level, fighting the imps on the Nautiloid is more interesting than fighting the big slug Voidwoken that show up on the Merryweather. That said, the Merryweather opening does have its own distinct tone that is effective until the Voidwoken attack. You start out on a slab with a source collar limiting your ability to wield source magic. You are degraded and bossed around by the Magisters. You are made to start low before potentially ascending to the greatest power in the setting. You are subjected to the abuses of the Magisters in their efforts to wipe out all sorcerers, and you get to see some Magisters behave more sadistically and gleefully than others. Someone seems to be killing fellow imprisoned sorcerers, starting a very brief murder investigation. Then the villainous Wendigo reveals she's the killer and summons Voidwoken to attack, and you get to choose whether to be selfish and instantly try to flee, or selfless and try to save as many other prisoners, and even Magisters, as you can. You're pretty quickly asked by the game, when you are stripped of power until disaster briefly gives you power over others, how do you handle it? The first Magister who greeted you, who delighted in your captivity, is now dying. Do you revel in it, or try to help her? After being abused by the powerful, will you perpetuate or break the cycle of abuse once you gain a position of power yourself? This early thematic seeding is a step above what is present in the Nautiloid sequence. But the Voidwoken attack on the Merryweather feels tonally misplaced. I know why it was put there. It's there to tutorialize combat mechanics and to cap off the short intro with a dramatic set piece, followed by the first sign of the gods choosing these sorcerers as their Godwoken by saving them from death at sea. It punctuates the tutorial with an action beat. But then all the Godwoken wash up on Fort Joy, which is where the Merryweather was already taking them, and they all wash up on the part of Fort Joy that leads directly to the prison yard where they would have been sent anyway, and then have to find a way to escape. Again. If this intro were exactly the same, but instead of a Voidwoken attack the party was just taken to Fort Joy as planned, would anything actually change? Plot-wise, I don't think so, except for Wendigo, who's a minor element anyway, which makes the entire attack feel pointless, and also a tonal interruption from the slow-build prison break story that immediately picks up where it left off upon reaching the fort. It feels like the mechanical needs of being a video game tutorial are undermining the narrative flow here, compared to Baldur's, where the tutorial is an action set piece throughout, and the party is free from imprisonment for good after the Nautiloid crashes, so it all feels more consistent. To be fair, the sinking of the Merryweather does introduce a few plot points that are important for later, but surely they could have been repurposed into a more low-key, less actionized version of the intro. It is indeed helpful to have a proper introduction of the Voidwoken as a threat, to demonstrate what the Magisters fear every sorcerer could bring into the world. We see this in the intro cutscene with Wendigo, but it's good to reinforce it during proper gameplay. It just doesn't feel like this was the best way to do so, given the other problems I already described. Speaking of Wendigo, she is an evil sorcerer who is the focus of the game's intro as she summons Voidwoken in public to get herself caught and arrested with other sorcerers on purpose. Her goal is to kill potential sorcerers who could be Godwoken and threaten the plans of the Voidwoken's leader, the God King. She's decided to do this by killing those that the Magisters, who are not aligned with the God King, have already rounded up for transport to Fort Joy. At Fort Joy, these sorcerers are kept within the walls with collars that prevent them from developing their powers until they're hollowed out and turned into mindless silent monks, who will then be no threat to the God King. Wendigo does not seem to be very smart. She is supposed to be a loser because after failing to kill the main party, she is forsaken by the God King and is easily defeated when she's found in the wilderness beyond Fort Joy. She then comes back from the dead a couple times to get humiliated and killed again before forsaking the God King in turn. For somebody who gets to narrate the intro, multiple between-act cutscenes, and and the first epilogue sequence, she's kind of nothing. It is important to have a character like her, who embodies the emptiness of the God King's promises to his followers. It just feels weird to give her the narrator role in these moments instead of the actual voice narrator, or Malady, or even the Lady Vengeance. Wendigo is set up like she's going to be one of the game's main antagonists, but it's completely possible to miss all the encounters with her and never see her again after the tutorial. And I'm not entirely sure what she's even trying to accomplish on the Merryweather anyway. Okay, to be fair, 100 hours later and buried in a mountain of exposition about other things, at the very end of the game it's clearly stated that the God King was sending Voidwoken around the world to take the source from sorcerers. So it's likely that Wendigo's mission is really to help the Kraken here intercept the Merryweather so it could eat all the sorcerers inside before the Magisters could purge them. Not sure why the Kraken even needs Wendigo around to find the Merryweather in the first place though, or why the Kraken doesn't seem to bother to pursue the sorcerers after it snaps the ship in half. It all just kind of feels like stuff happens to happen. While I made a version of that criticism of Baldur's Gate 3's intro in the past, this seems even messier to me, with question-raising hindsight manifesting earlier in the experience, and without as strong introductions for its companions to smooth things over. Of the companion introductions, Lohse and the Red Prince are probably the strongest. Sebille and Beast come across as the most cliché, while Ifan just feels kind of there. He gets one of the better second intros in Fort Joy, but just can't compare to the Red Prince immediately giving you a job interview to be his slave. It's funny and memorable, efficiently characterizing the Red Prince as being so pampered and sheltered, he'd think random strangers in a prison ship are jumping at the chance to become his personal slave. I do find that this implies a greater degree of social obliviousness than he shows throughout the rest of the game, but all things considered, it's a minor issue. Lohse stands out just because famous bard being swarmed by children and trying to get out of it is a bit more of a unique situation compared to Sebille, Beast, and Ifan, and the brief moment indicating her possession is decent at raising intrigue about her situation. The other introductions may be less interesting, but at the very least, Ifan's conveys his familiarity with the Divine Order as he discusses his former rank over the Magister currently guarding him, Beast's his intimate familiarity with sailing, and Sebille's her physical openness as she offers to lick your arm to use her elf ability to read memories from bodies despite just meeting you. But again, these initial scenes are less effective introductions than the additional ones most of them get later on at Fort Joy. Ironically, the Red Prince and Lohse have the least memorable of those, so I guess things balance out. I suspect the game was designed this way because of the play as origin characters system, so Larian wanted all the playable characters to start out the same way, and also, all of the companions getting to be chosen and saved from the Merryweather's sinking by the gods to be potential divines is meant to kickstart the competition between them. But by Baldur's, Larian seems to have decided that such boons were not worth cramming the first impressions of all the companions together, and decided that it didn't matter for every origin companion to be present in the tutorial. This game would have benefited from something similar, I think, if only a couple origin characters were on the Merryweather with you, while others had come to Fort Joy on earlier ships. But they couldn't know the lay of the land too much already, since the party has to be on even footing since you can play as all of them. It's been amusing to try to untangle what isn't working about this intro for me, since each time I think about a way it could have been made differently, I'm reminded of a reason for it being the way it currently is. It's a good reminder that a lot of creative pursuit has so many moving parts that the creators need to prioritize which of a few incompatible elements they want to give more attention to. In Original Sin 2, Larian prioritized planting seeds for the competitive divinity-seeking plot and giving a splashy introduction to the Voidwoken. In Baldur's, they prioritized strong companion introductions and more natural tone progression from ship crash to exploring the first full act. I assume it's obvious which works better for me. In concept, the idea of starting off the game with an open-ended prison escape objective is really good. It's a clear goal that feels personal without requiring a lot of time to establish who your character even is, kind of like Fallout New Vegas structuring its first act on, I'm gonna find and kill that guy that shot me in the face. But even after getting over how kind of pointless it feels to have the prison ship destroyed in transit only for us to end up exactly where we were being sent anyway, I don't think the Fort Joy sequence is as strong as it could have been, though this is probably my most nitpicky criticism of the whole game. My point about the Fort Joy escape is this is good and cool but noticeably could have been better, not this is bad. While the Magisters obscure their misdeeds to the general public, the sorcerers there are routinely abused and tortured within its walls until they are killed or drained. And yet, navigating this area doesn't feel that oppressive. You enter the prison itself by just walking through the gates. You get within spitting distance of the leaders of the Magisters, near Bishop Alexandar, the would-be future divine himself, and nobody bats an eye. Maybe the Magisters are a bit loose on security because this is an island. There's nowhere for the prisoners to go, and they would see any ships coming well in advance of most attacks. That explanation might hold together better if the Magisters weren't only controlling a third of the overall island with an active resistance camp just to the north. You're telling me that 6 unknown sorcerers waltz into the prison out of nowhere and nobody stops them to make sure they aren't with the Seekers? Fort Joy is portrayed as an open-air prison in which sorcerers are basically left to their own devices as long as they stay in the fort and don't cause trouble, until Magisters show up to potentially take them away for torture. We don't witness Magisters actively do this. We see the prisoners idling around outside, and we see a couple brutalized prisoners and gore inside, but not the process of going from the former to the latter. They certainly never intrude upon the player unless anyone in the party has removed their source collar, which can be done early for one character by winning the arena. Doing so actually makes the prison area more tense, since the character in question now has to sneak around the patrolling Magister and can't approach the one standing guard anymore. Oh yeah, there's an arena below the main courtyard. It's apparently a well-known arena, since when you go to Driftwood and see their arena, being champion of this one makes them like you more. Surely the Magisters know about this and don't care, happy to let their prisoners beat each other to death if they want. It seems odd to me though that as far as I could tell, the Magisters don't mention it at all. At the least, I'd expect to see a couple taking bets on the fights. I don't have a problem with this existing, but it's one more thing the prisoners do themselves that makes Fort Joy seem way freer and more of a chill place than feels appropriate. So does the fact that Ifan and Sebille both came here on purpose and have no worries about being able to get out once they kill who they're here to kill. I know that assassin breaks into prison to kill target is a very common trope. I don't have a problem with them doing this. Similarly, I like that it's discordantly bright and sunny on this brutal prison island because of the ironic contrast. It's the cumulative effect of all of these things I've mentioned, rather than any single one of them, that undermines the feeling of Fort Joy as an oppressive prison. I would guess the main reason for this design choice is in service of the gameplay. Larian RPGs borrow a lot of immersive sim qualities. It's why their games are arguably among the best CRPGs ever from a gameplay perspective. To make Fort Joy feel more appropriately prison-like would risk limiting this quality if players feel they don't have enough room to experiment and figure out escape routes, and it's very understandable to not want players to have to wait several more hours to dig into the game's best systemic selling point. Then again, more restrictions, if well-designed, might encourage even more interaction with the immersive sim-esque elements. I think if I were somehow put in a position of redesigning Fort Joy, I would either add more Magister patrols and reduce the feeling that players have free reign within the walls, or make the area bigger, like a proper town, giving more breathing room for the idea of this place as a quote-unquote home under strict Magister watch. This middle ground means that the horrible prison camp doesn't feel that different to navigate through from the ordinary town of Driftwood in the next act. Maybe that works for you, demonstrating that the Magisters are so tyrannical that there's no functional difference between a village under their guard and their prison, but I get the sense we're meant to see these places differently. It's a shame because starting this CRPG busting out of prison feels pretty unique, and I like how deliberate and self-motivated it feels compared to the intros of other RPGs. The interior of the fort itself is appropriately nasty, and that does create an effect that might be a counter to my criticisms of the prison yard. There are Magisters, like those guarding the front gate, who see the fort as a safe home for people who would otherwise be a danger to the world, and they apparently buy into their order's whitewashing of what happens on the island. To this end, the grounds of the fort seeming less severe, only for Niles' workshop and the Sourcehound kennel, and the bit where High Judge Oravand creates a silent monk in front of you to demonstrate the abuses, actually does resemble peeling away the layers of propaganda to see the real misdeeds. Again, none of this is to say the sections in Fort Joy are bad. I think finding ways to fulfill the objective of escaping the fortress is still really fun, but there's more potential than was reached. I want to briefly return to Orovand, since the conversation with him is, while easily missable, an important early introduction to the Magister's reasonings for oppressing the sorcerers, and our first glimpse at their leader's motives. Orovand is the first major character we can meet who argues for the inherent threat posed by Source.
I don't suppose I'd look forward to this fate myself, but you must understand, if your kind are left well enough alone, the Voidwoken will destroy us. All of us.
In order to combat the dangers of source power, magisters like Orovand will amass and abuse political power, to declare those who use it dangerous enemies of Rivellon and round them all up for eventual extermination. We see the evils of this kind of power before we escape the prison. We're faced with it as soon as we take control of our character. But out there, the island of Reaper's Eye is covered in ruined monuments to the evils that source magic can commit, showing us that the magisters may have valid concerns, if not valid methods. The character of Braccus Rex the Source King is from Original Sin 1, and my ability to contextualize him from that game is, of course, limited. In this game, he is most characterized by exploring the impact of his evils outside of Fort Joy, the seat of his power during his reign. Then he's kind of dropped from the game, giving the impression he's just a historical lore figure, until he reappears at the very end to basically just be a plot twist with no real character beyond evil. The characterization he receives on Reaper's Eye is one of a wantonly cruel tyrant who gleefully uses source magic to inflict punishment on anyone who slightly inconveniences him. He turned one group of people into immortal, perpetually burning pigs, kept another as a group of decapitated but alive heads on spikes around a booby-trapped chest. He betrayed his lieutenants by sealing away their soul jars and confining them to a tower. The most interesting bit of his story we get comes from the priestess to Amadia, Gratiana. Gratiana is introduced as the keeper of Amadia's sanctuary, where the heroic anti-magister seekers are hiding out and trying to help a specific Godwoken, and then also the party, escape Reaper's Eye to eventually claim Divinity. Gratiana has aided the seekers by providing them shelter and healing, and you can find her soul jar in the vault along with those of the other Rex lieutenants. She then reveals that she was actually Braccus's lover, and beyond that, she was at least in part responsible for his power and insanity. She claims she taught him how to steal source from others, and that the more he stole, the more he craved, and the more unstable he became.
My heart held such fear, but with Braccus I was safe. He needed me, and I needed him. As his strength grew, so too did mine. There is nothing you cannot do when you sit on the lap of a powerful king. And I did it all. But power changes a man, as he changes his nation. Braccus grew paranoid, angry, murderous.
So, according to Gratiana's version of events, the horrors committed by Rex were not things he would have done before he accumulated power. Power corrupted him, made him the monster he's remembered as. How good of a person he really was before this is not established, and Gratiana, the main perspective we get on his fall, likely views his former self with some degree of rose-tinted nostalgia, so he may have truly been nobler once, or simply not as capable of enacting his worst impulses. But as Gratiana tells it, it is the gaining of power that turned Braccus into a tyrant. And the thrill of being with him corrupted her too, compelled her to egg him on until she lost her position, lost her power, and spent millennia in repentance. One might be tempted to view the cautionary tale of Braccus Rex as being more a thing of Rivellon's past than its present. Sure, he may represent how scary sorcerers can be, but he's a figure from long ago, and now sorcerers are the ones being persecuted. But the two sorcerers we meet out in Reaper's Eye show that the potential threat of Braccus still exists in those around today. There's Wendigo, of course, but also the witch Radica, who openly abuses her power for her own benefit and amusement like Braccus.
We are the most powerful beings in all of Rivellon. Braccus Rex knew that, and he populated this cavern with the bodies of those who stood in his way. Our way.
There are sorcerers out there who embody the Magister's worst caricatures of them, who can do real harm. As we're exploring Reaper's Eye, we are seeing the mundane and the fantastical expressions of power both being portrayed negatively, tied together to reinforce each other's worst excesses. The Magisters show political repression, systemic power being abused, at the same time as Source is providing a broader metaphor for power in the abstract. The Magisters are co-opting the products of Braccus' Source tyranny, since he created Fort Joy and most mechanisms of torture found within. Resurrected as Vreedamen to advise Dallas and Bishop Alexandar, Braccus has enabled the Magisters by providing them with his old, tainted means. Because the Magisters rely on Vreedamen, the game ties the mundane to the metaphor, rather than displacing all of its critique of power onto that more easily discarded metaphor. It is this setup that writes thematic checks the end of the game refuses to cash. Without this setup, I don't think the ending would be as much of a mess as it is, but also without it the whole game would be less interesting. It's worth going over the place of the Seekers in this narrative. We're introduced to them as bold rebels, helping smuggle the innocent out of Fort Joy with some of the more moral of the Magisters. They're led by this paragon figure named Garrett who has gone off on a mission and hasn't returned, and the Seekers in Amadia's sanctuary are despondent without him and feel overjoyed at his return. They are too willing to put all their faith in individual figureheads for their own good. The Seekers are also not quite as altruistic as they at first appear, not out of self-interest but out of tunnel vision. Their goal is to free a specific Godwoken, not to take down Fort Joy altogether. They believe that their most effective tool against the Magisters is the elven Godwoken Verdus, and so they have come to Reaper's Eye specifically for him, with other escapees like Han being sort of bonuses more than anything else. You find Verdus in Fort Joy's prison, in no state to do any sort of God-waking, but he identifies the party as worthy Godwoken in his stead. No matter which Godwoken are ultimately freed, the Seekers' plan remains the same: find people they believe are ordained to claim the immense powers of Divinity, and then have those people take the lead to solve every other problem. The Seekers do not distrust power, they want to find the supposed right person to wield the power, and to help them ascend, and this is more important to them than properly taking down the fortress. To be fair, I don't think the Seekers have the numbers to actually take down Fort Joy, especially since so many of them are killed during their arrival to Reaper's Eye, so in-universe focusing on just the Godwoken is the more practical plan, but thematically it is important that their objective is to save the few chosen ones and ignore the many, and it's also important that over the course of the game, the image of the Seekers as the good guys will be significantly challenged. They're never depicted as worse than the Magisters or the other actual villains, but by the end of it, their righteousness and the correctness of their approach is questioned. What they are right about is that the Godwoken are the keys to the rest of the plot, and there are several points around the island that can trigger a vision from the gods that officially deem you as their Godwoken. The god you are chosen by depends on your character's species, with the god of humans Rallic claiming a custom human character and the companion Ifan, the god of dwarves Duna claiming a custom dwarf and beast, the god of lizards Zorl Stissa claiming a custom lizard and red prince, the god of elves Tirsan Delius claiming a custom elf and Sebille, the god of magic Amadia claiming undead and Fane, and the god of orcs Vrogir and god of imps Zanteza getting nothing. Sucks to suck, I guess. Most interestingly, Lohse is not the champion of any gods. The demon in her head is her patron, which terrifies the gods. This is what sets up the competitive nature of the rest of the game's plot, because the gods have their own champions, but the divine system that empowered Lucian all those years ago is such that there can be only one divine.
There can be only one!
One of the other major through lines that is established by this time is the reverence for Lucian himself as the great big hero who is basically the biggest arbiter of what is and is not moral. The Seekers and Magisters both see themselves as inheritors of Lucian's legacy. Several Magisters who defect from their order cite Lucian's morals as their reasons for doing so, saying that their fellow Magisters have strayed from his vision in their brutality. Lucian's son, Bishop Alexandar, is introduced to us exhibiting a bit of reluctance towards brutality, though is still perfectly willing to go forward with it, because he believes doing so means he follows his father's example. Seekers like Gareth cite Lucian to justify their opposition to Alexandar and the Magisters, as a paragon of virtue, and Gareth, in turn, presents himself as a paragon for the Seekers. That sure is the mustache of a paragon. Ultimately, this is set up for a later subversion of Lucien's role. He is spoken of as an unimpeachable hero during Reaper's Eye, so that by the time we get to the Nameless Isle and arcs, that popular image of him can be challenged as we learn from records and ghosts how ruthless he could be. Especially since by this time, Lucien is already known to have dropped a death fog bomb on the elves that has wiped out a huge portion of their population. The friendliest Magister we see on this island is this guy out in the forest, blinded by an undead attack. When he learns you're a sorcerer, he futilely tries to arrest you, but his sudden injury has made him completely vulnerable. Powerless before you. This is the second time the game has placed an injured Magister at your mercy, and given you the choice of whether to return the torment your character has been subjected to, or try to help out. And this time, the Magister in question, Lohse, never did anything to you personally, unlike the one on the Merryweather. If you defend him from the undead, he thanks you and agrees to part in peace. You don't have to use your power over him to punish him. After finding the Seekers, officially becoming Godwoken, finding a way to purge the Magister's deadly shriekers, and bringing Gareth back.
Did you say Gareth's back?
Yeah, that's right, Shadowheart, he sure is. Anyway, with all of that done, all that's left to do is actually escape Reaper's Eye by stealing the Magister Dallas's ship, the Lady Vengeance. Bishop Alexandar is built up throughout this first act as the main villain of the game. He's the leader of the Magisters, he is the son of the legendary Lucien the Divine, and your greatest rival to your ascension as another Godwoken. He gets his big introduction scene before you can even recruit most of your party at the gates of Fort Joy, so you know he's important. This is all a narrative sleight of hand. His scene at the gates is also establishing Dallas, who will usurp his role, and Alexandar is killed on the way out of Fort Joy and taken out of the picture. Oh, sure, he actually survives this confrontation even if you've burnt him to a crisp. He's somehow on the ship in the brig because I guess Malady or Garrett brought him on board without your knowledge before you got there. And from here, he gets better and shows up on the Nameless Isle one last time. But when that happens, he's been reduced to forming a splinter group of loyalists localized to just that island. So the main antagonist figure of Bishop Alexandar really is killed here, in the escape from Reaper's Eye, leaving Dallas to take over the Magisters in his stead and reveal herself as the game's true villain, except for the other two. Or three. We'll get there. On the one hand, I think it's cool to subvert the expected antagonist role like this, and it furthers the game's dissection of power by revealing Alexandar, literal heir to Lucien's divinity, to be a sort of narrative paper tiger. His position of power is rather fragile, and in fact, with the later implication that Dallas wanted him killed, he becomes the first of several examples of someone's power actually making them vulnerable, making them a target, rather than protecting them. He expects he will inherit power, but his birthright means nothing. On the other hand, Alexandar is by far the most developed main antagonist in the game, and his defeat here cedes the main stage to shallow cartoon characters. Dallas and Vredeman take over the Magisters, but are sneering tyrant archetypes up until the overstuffed Final Confrontation. The God King at least has a revenge motivation and consistent presence with his ability to speak through his Voidwoken and possessed scarecrows and his sworn servants. Alexandar is a more human antagonist, a would-be hero so convinced of his rightness and desperate to live up to his father's legacy that he is willing to do horrible things to his fellow sorcerers and Godwoken. He is a foil to the main party in a way no other antagonists can match, which is probably why he inexplicably survives your fight here and shows up again on the Nameless Isle. Okay, inexplicably is perhaps a little unfair. It may not be outright stated anywhere I noticed, but I'm pretty sure Alexandar's immortality is because he is one of Rallick's Godwoken, and Rallick is keeping him alive just as the gods all kept their chosen Godwoken alive after the Merryweather's sinking, and Rallick wants to hedge his bets even though his Godwoken are now fighting each other. And since, in this playthrough, I am not taking Ifan with me, Alexandar becomes Rallick's only champion, so he has extra motivation to keep him alive. Though I guess if this is the case, it does raise the question why the gods allow some of your party members to just die. So basically, there is some thematic meaning to be found in Alexandar's early overthrow, and it's a fun diversion from the obvious narrative trajectory, but in the long run, it hurts the game, because it's just tossed away its most developed villain and doesn't offer up any worthy replacements in terms of real personal narrative connection to the player party. Unless you're playing as Lohse, but put a pin in that. I hope you've got a lot of pins handy. And if you look past the high-level main antagonists to focus on smaller-scope side villains, the Shadow Prince is pretty good. The fight with Alexandar is interrupted by a huge Voidwoken, which does a good job reminding us that ultimately, the Voidwoken are the main threat that both you and Alexandar are trying to stop, even if a true alliance to do so is impossible. Then you beat Alexandar and you meet Malady, a half-elf, half-demon lady with a mysterious agenda who very much likes the idea of having a future divine who owes her a favor, so has decided to commit herself to helping the Seekers and, now, the player's party of Godwoken. She and the other Seekers have captured Dallas's ship, the Lady Vengeance, a living vessel made out of the wood of an ancestor tree, which means the elf spirit inside is now enslaved to the ship's master. It's up to the player to choose whether to free the Lady Vengeance, after which she will take you wherever you want to go anyway out of gratitude, or continue to use her slave mark to force her to serve you. Also on the ship is definitely not a necromancer, Tarquin, who has been forced into Dallas's service. Between him and the Lady Vengeance herself, and as we later learn also Vreedaman, it's clear that Dallas makes extensive use of forced servitude. Will you do the same, or are you willing to relinquish your power over others for the sake of genuine cooperation? As I said back at the start, this is the turning point where you have to choose which companions will actually carry on to the rest of the game, and which ones will die horribly when Dallas catches up to the Lady Vengeance and Malady pulls the ship into the afterlife, the Hall of Echoes, to escape. Because I have chosen Beast and Ifan to perish for this playthrough, I figure I might as well go over the initial impressions their characters leave on Fort Joy. Ifan has a pretty clear gruff assassin with the heart of gold thing going on, with a bit more emphasis on the heart of gold, and the gruff part really just being how his voice sounds, at least on Reaper's Eye. He may be a trained killer, but he's good at putting on a friendly face in your first meeting, and when you reunite with him on Fort Joy, he's going out of his way to defend a fellow sorcerer from a couple others who have joined the local prison gang. I know from my first playthrough with him in the party instead of Red Prince that he brings a good perspective to the group as a former devotee of Lucian who was tricked into helping nuke the elves with Death Fog. Without him, the Divine Order loses a bit of its complexity, and we lose a major insight into the actual Death Fog incident, though at least we get other NPCs who can provide some of those details. Meanwhile, Beast starts out following his pirate archetype pretty closely, with much of his exposition being about how his cousin Justinia, the Queen of the Dwarves, is a tyrant he's tried fighting against as a revolutionary. Through him, we as players would theoretically get a lot of detail about the Dwarven Kingdom from an angle that Justinia and Lohse and Driftwood don't have. It's also notable that he seems to be the most selfless of all the party members based on his Fort Joy interactions, since his main concern is Justinia's tyranny, while everyone else has more personal objectives. Of course, the fact he is directly related to Justinia gives him a personal stake in things as well, but he comes across as less self-absorbed than everyone else. I can't lay definitive judgment on either of them, as it's been several years since I directly experienced Ifan's arc and never finished the game with Beast, but based on just the Fort Joy interactions, they come across as the blander of the six. Part of me wanted to look for a mod to let me keep all the companions alive so I could properly analyze the whole party, but ultimately I decided that I'd rather discuss Larian's intended experience of losing at least two of these companions, and thus losing out on the perspectives they bring to the party. If you want to build a party just to get the most meaningful insight into the major factions, then maybe swap Lohse for Beast. But if you do that, you'll miss one of the highlights of the whole game when you get to finish her quest in Arcs. Also, this part of the game features another element repeated in Baldur's Gate 3. A bunch of NPCs you meet in the first act end up getting killed off in transit to the second, this time most of the Seekers. In this case, I think the characters are more developed, and the fact that you see their deaths make the moment more visceral. But the only one left to mourn them is Garrett, and after arriving in Reaper's Coast, he barely talks about them again, compared to the Tiefling survivors in Baldur's, who have much more impactful mourning for their fallen comrades. So in the long run, Baldur's still does it better, even if I care more about the Seekers who get killed than the specific Tieflings who die off screen in the Shadow-Cursed lands. Anyway, Malady uses extremely powerful and self-detrimental magic to have the Lady Vengeance warp into the afterlife and then warp back near Reaper's Coast by the mainland. And this is where the next, and largest, and overall best part of the game takes place. Reaper's Coast is a huge overworld with several distinct sub-areas and one single overarching goal: gain power. This is where the game's fundamental suspicion of power clarifies into its most interesting implementation, because your given objective is to do things that are thematically criticized. You land on Reaper's Coast to find the founder of the Seekers and Master of Source, Maester Siva, who helps you get back in touch with your patron god. When you do, the god makes it clear that you have to expand your capacity for source energy to prepare yourself for ascension. After this conversation, Siva tells you that the Magisters have killed or neutralized so many sorcerers, including draining her to the point she can never use Source again and is slowly dying. The only sorcerers left who can train the party are the most dangerous, or, in Siva's own words, evil sorcerers.
Sorcerers, evil, controlling your source, saving Rivellon, please. Please tell me at least some of this rings a bell. Your focus, your only focus, must be on finding these masters.
So the game is telling you unambiguously that going around and gathering power will require moral compromise. That said, Siva does give a contrasting speech about the responsibility that being the Divine requires.
Becoming the Divine means taking on the power of all the gods and the responsibility for all the races. The Divine was created by the gods to shelter us from the void. The Divine cannot use his power for anything else. When you become the Divine, there is no more self.
This is the first time that the game will directly raise this question, and later on, Malady gives you a different, more self-interested answer.
You can do what's good for you, too. All things in balance, you know.
Whichever perspective you choose to follow, this pursuit of power is inevitably going to put you face to face with terrible people, who will use terrible means to grant you power after exploring a whole island scattered with evidence that this power may very well corrupt you into being like Braccus Rex. The quickest way to replenish your source energy is by draining dead bodies and lingering ghosts, and draining the ghosts makes it clear you are eating and obliterating their souls. Not quite sure if draining bodies without ghosts attached still obliterates their soul all the way in the Hall of Echoes, but I guess it's possible since the sorcerer Riker summoning the souls of people interned in Stone Garden Cemetery implies maybe there is still a connection with the original body for a soul that no longer lingers. Technically, Reaper's Coast is a wide-open region, where you can go anywhere and tackle things in any order, but areas are leveled differently and it's very hard to defeat enemies more than one level higher than you, so you basically have one set path through the region. Make it to the town of Driftwood, do quests there, then go to Wrecker's Cave in the west, then north a bit to the Cloisterwood, then cut through the meadows in the middle of the map to reach Stone Garden, and then deal with the Black Pits, then up to the northeast to the Sawmill, and further east to Paradise Downs, and finally finish up at Blood Moon Island. You can try to deviate from this path, but mixing it up too much will get you killed by enemies who have out-leveled you. This also means there is common progression to the Order of the Source Masters you can learn from. Mortis, then Haneg, then Riker, then maybe Sahelia or Almira, then the Advocate, and then Jahan. The first three of these sorcerers ask you to do increasingly questionable things to gain power from them. Mortis has you eat a Voidwoken heart, which is gross but more harmful to yourself than anyone else. But who knows if it will corrupt you somehow, make you susceptible to the God King's influence. Haneg doesn't seem evil, but her method requires you to drain the life out of all the animals in the forest, destroying the vibrant nature of the area and removing your ability to talk to animals if you have it. Riker has you sacrifice the souls of those interned in Stone Garden. The game allows you to turn each sorcerer down, but you need the help of two if you're to accomplish your objective. And by the time you reach Riker, if you've already found Mortis too suspicious and Haneg's price too abhorrent, a first-time player might not know how many more chances they have to get the power they need. Only Jahan's name is left from those given to you at the start of the quest, and if you turn down Riker, who's to say that the next sorcerer's price won't be even worse? After all, at this point we've escalated from eating something gross to killing a bunch of animals to destroying the conscious souls of humans and other sapient beings. Can you really keep turning down these deals in the hope something more morally clean will come around? So the pressure is on to accept Riker's deal, to make a moral compromise for more power. This is also reflected in the game's XP system. While you do get some XP from own quest progression most of the time, if you pass an encounter by talking someone out of a fight, you don't get nearly as much XP as if you had killed them, if you even get XP. Encounters that don't directly resolve quests that are handled non-lethally may yield no XP at all. The sorcerer Mortis has mind-controlled a whole bunch of dwarves to serve him, and they will attack you if they see you coming. But in this ruined fortress, it's made clear they're mind-controlled, and there's an easy way to sneak around them. But you don't get XP for getting past them, only for killing them. And you need every bit of XP you can get in this game if you want to keep up with the enemy levels. My first playthrough, I finished at level 19, which made the final enemies at level 20 way harder than they otherwise would have been. Normally, I hate when RPGs are designed like this, but I find it weirdly fitting with Original Sin 2. In your quest for power, you have to do selfish things if you are to acquire it. You are incentivized to be more brutal, more combative, less diplomatic, less charitable towards enemies who maybe don't really want to fight you, and more willing to backstab someone you already talked down just to get extra XP for killing them. The final enemies of the game are level 20, and that's where you'll likely get to if you're doing as many quests as you can find, but 20 is not the level cap. You can go higher if you find ways to maximize XP. Hell, it might be to your benefit in strictly gameplay terms to massacre the entire town of Driftwood for the XP once you've done all their quests. It would certainly make that annoying dwarf lady stop repeating the same 3 bark lines every 5 minutes.
Keeping it together, Bree. Keeping it together, Bree. Keeping it together, Bree.
Baldur's Gate 3 may have repeated NPC bark lines in towns and stuff, but I don't remember it ever being as frequent and obnoxious as it is here. But anyway, Original Sin 2 presents the pursuit of power as a destructive and selfish endeavor, demanding you to cause harm to others for your own benefit. You are told to become like the Magisters, like Alexandar, willing to sacrifice others to do what you think is right, and are then often confronted with the cost of this sacrifice. It turns out that the later Source Masters you can encounter do offer you less morally compromising ways to expand your power, though they are still a little bit iffy. If you save Sebille at the sawmill, she will expand your source by connecting you to the elven ancestor tree hive mind, which one might understandably be wary of, but at least you're not murdering any innocents this time. If you help the friendly succubus Almira, she will happily expand your source, in more ways than one, high five gamers. And there isn't a real downside, but it's understandable to hesitate about submitting to a succubus. Jehan just makes you sacrifice a demon, and demons are not sympathetic beings in this game, so it is possible to have a more morally clean path through Reaper's Coast by only learning source from Almira and Jehan, and Sebille if you aren't too concerned with the hive mind thing. This does undermine the thematic strength of what I just talked about. If you know all the ways to get source from a prior playthrough or a guide, you can avoid at least some of this feeling of power corrupting you. As a possible counter, though, one could say the earlier Source Masters represent the quick and easy path to power through moral compromise, while the others require more effort.
Is the dark side stronger?
No, but busier, more seductive.
Indeed, getting power from the Advocate, the literal demon you can deal with to steal the source of someone he says is an evildoer but you only have his word this is the case, does not require you to do anything beyond reaching him. He helps you as an advance for fighting the Black Ring who are messing with Blood Moon Island's ancestor tree. This is a good deed, but leaving the tree in the Advocate's hands after is not. Meanwhile, to get Jehan's help, you have to kill the Advocate, who's certainly no pushover, and finding Almira requires you to get through the toxic miasma around Paradise Down, and agree to help her find her way out of the region rather than prompt a fight with her. Sebille can't help if a drama leak makes Lohse kill her on Fort Joy, so you have to have saved her then to get to help her now. The good path takes more work. You are practically forced to do all these quests anyway to keep up your levels, and any Source Master you meet after you've already maxed out your source pool will reward you with a Source skill book instead, an especially powerful fight-changing spell. There is still incentive to keep gaining power by doing all the quests and accepting all the Source Master's boons, regardless of the price. You are presented with many opportunities to be heroic, of course, and these moments may stick in your mind often enough to make the game still feel like it is, on the whole, a heroic heroic fantasy where you have the dialogue option to be evil about it sometimes. But on average, the good acts you can accomplish are through liberating others from control and refusing to impose your own. There is a divide between the murky acts of gaining power that is your main quest and the real heroism you can accomplish just by helping others. There's even a moment with the Lich Zash where he asks you to sacrifice one of your current source points to feed him, and if you don't, the next time you see him he'll be eating the soul of a dead child. The source point is replenishable, so it's hardly a real sacrifice, but you're still being asked whether you will surrender some of your power for the sake of helping innocents. There are a few bits of dialogue that directly engage with the nature of power. As already discussed, there's Siva and Malady presenting power as sacrifice of personal desire and the indulgence of it, respectively. The sorcerer Hanag gives her own view of Source, calling it beautiful and denying responsibility for the Voidwoken.
It is not our fault that our talents draw the void. We are not the problem. We are the hope. Gwydion feared the great power within him. He did his best to hide it, but something so beautiful cannot stay hidden forever.
But she was also responsible for designing Lucien's big death fog bomb, which she does call a mistake. She has the capacity for remorse for the destruction great power can enact, but does not want to consider Source a possible cause of this. The price for learning Source from her being the snuffing out of an entire forest certainly challenges her assertion. There's a djinn you can find who was once a Godwoken, but Zorlstissa decided to revoke that power, and in his thirst to reclaim it, he has turned to the void instead.
She called me Godwoken once, Zorlstissa. She promised I would shine bright across the world, that I would right all wrongs. My god gave it all. Power, glory, hope. It was intoxicating, until she took it away. What kind of a monster gives you that power only to strip it from you? To promise you will be the light of the world and then cast you into darkness? There was so much wrong with the world. So much that I needed to fix. So I sought power elsewhere. The Void said I could have eternal power. That I could be the light of the world. And it delivered. I have power unlike any Godwoken, even if I lack my freedom.
He seems to have become addicted to the power of the Godwoken, and the prestige that comes with it. He claims to have wanted to help the world, but these words ring hollow as he describes seeking power no matter the source. And his seemingly ego-driven quest to reclaim power has only trapped him. Meanwhile, the quests in Driftwood, and especially in the Black Pits, remind us that the Magisters and their abuse of political power remains a huge problem, even after escaping Fort Joy. In the Black Pits, you catch Magisters in the process of massacring the Crossleys, in retaliation for them giving a place to hide to their cousin Gwydion, who is a sorcerer and Hanag's apprentice. They attacked, Gwydion accidentally summons some Voidwoken, and does so again in combat with the Magisters, in the one instance in the whole game where a sorcerer using their abilities actually does attract the monsters. I know Lucien later implies he made up this talking point to justify purging sorcerers, but it actually happens with Gwydion, and with Wendigo, so I don't know. In other words, the Black Pits is a clear demonstration of the horrific methods the Magisters use to deal with Source where nobody comes out looking good. It's very Dragon Age Templar Order in that the brutality used to deal with the very real demonic threat these magic users possess only ends up causing them to resort to means most likely to summon the demons to survive. I wouldn't say these dialogue scenes are the most nuanced, but the game putting you in a position where you must personally engage with the moral cost of gaining power is its own kind of sophistication. And even without taking the finale into consideration, I'm confident we are meant to be thinking about this as we play, given the existence of this one treatise on governance you can find in the Lady Vengeance main cabin. Must never forget that all citizens of the realm have an equal stake in its success and ought never to be subjected to the will of the few, and especially not to that of a tyrant. There is not a monarch alive who has not, by sheer force of nature, been removed from the cares and concerns of his or her citizens. Thus, there is not a monarch alive who deserves his or her position. If what I say is true, you may wonder how it is at all possible to govern, if the act of governing itself corrupts. My answer is very simple. Let the people rule. The existence of this text in Dallas's bedroom is interesting given her rampant subjugation of others, including the very ship where she keeps it. It's a hint at her ultimate goal, and a hint at some sort of I use the tools of my enemy type of justification that she never really speaks about herself. Though also in this room is her diary, the readable part being her recognizing her own similarity with Braccus Rex, saying, "We're so alike. There's a kinship there I've never felt before. I suppose history would paint me the same way it painted him if I don't succeed. Dallas the Tyrant, Dallas Rex. Power is important. I said it to him in one form, and he said it back to me in another. Power is necessary in order to do great things, worthy things. The only worthy thing. He knew that, and so do I. And heads break along the way. But in those shockwaves, something invaluable shakes loose. I've never met anyone who understands this. What I wouldn't give to open those bars and go sit beside him, look straight into his eyes." By the time you reach the end of Reaper's Coast, another component of the game's exploration of power has emerged: why people seek it in the first place.
If I can't get this thing out of me, then I'll need to become so powerful it won't be able to control me ever again.
Many in this game seek power out of fear of those who are already powerful, in a self-perpetuating, all-consuming arms race. The Magister's oppression of the sorcerers is an especially extreme example of this, and the God King uses it to build his own cult in Rivellon. He makes grand promises to his followers, incompatible promises in fact, but it doesn't matter as long as they swear to him and become bound to serve him. And then they are trapped even if they can observe his manipulations. The succubus Almira provides a pretty straightforward explanation of how the God King makes his promises and acquires more followers.
He is a god for the godless, a beacon for those who have no place in this world. He seeks to cast down the world of the Seven and build a new world with the Sworn at his side. The Black Ring flock to him after Lucian unleashed his death fog. The undead stand by him because he offers them a return to life. I don't know why the Voidwoken flock to him.
Not sure why Almira was able to actually say God King while still sworn when Mortis trying to prompts the God King to kill him, and the Advocate saying it sparks a Voidwoken assault. The God King recruits the Black Ring because Lucian's use of the Death Fog was a frightening display of power that left them with nothing. He is able to manipulate Queen Justinia of the Dwarves and Red Princess Sadha of the Lizards because the Dwarves and Lizards fear they could face such a Death Fog attack next. Power is seen as a shield, but gaining power, or the possibility of it, makes one a target, says Original Sin 2. Sebille and the Red Prince both became targets and their lives were ruined, especially Sebille's, because of their potential to gain power that might threaten others.
Find Sadha and kill her. If she births dragons, all other races will unite against us, and this time they will destroy us for good. The Mother Tree and her scions do not seek to carve out their own part of peace in this world. They seek to carve out the whole wide world for themselves.
Many characters are aware of the famous Spider-Man saying, and recognize that the Godwoken must succeed, but still seek to know what the Godwoken will do after their victory. The Lady Vengeance asks you directly what your intentions are with your incoming divinity, and responds most positively to you saying that you'll use it to help others. Something that has been apparent since Fort Joy is that the people of Rivellon seem to hold a lot of reverence towards the deceased Lucian and give little thought to the gods themselves. They feel more like underground objects of cult worship in a monotheistic Lucianist society than the millennia-old, established and institutionalized deities of the setting they really are. The big statue in the Fort Joy courtyard is only of Lucian, while the two shrines to Amadia are buried in the out-of-the-way fortress prison and in the sanctuary beyond the walls where the Seekers have taken refuge. The various people in the fort and in Driftwood invoke Lucian all the time, and almost never the actual gods. The elves are the only people met on Reaper's Coast who seem to have any meaningful cultural connection to their god Tyrsendelius, and even then they talk more about their ancestor trees than the god himself. The most notable side NPC with detailed thoughts on the gods is the Djinn, who hardly counts as a representative of the common Rivellon mindset. There's the bridgekeeper Mary Pruitt, who outright brushes off the notion of thanking the gods for the party helping her survive a Voidwoken attack. It feels strange, then, that the game's plot makes you an agent of the gods, and is ultimately, in a sense, about the fall of the gods, but minimizes their cultural presence within the world to the point that they all straight up die before the last act of the game, and nobody seems to notice or care. When you get your mission of ascension directly from the gods themselves, some companions dismiss them.
His was an exercise in power, brutal, like all true power is. His was a lesson, meant to discipline, not to edify. Why would I obey such a god?
Can a god be called a god still, if they have to plead with another to assume the powers they seem to have lost?
It's weird because part of the game's plot is that the gods have been weakened enough to give the God King and Voidwoken an opportunity to invade, so it might seem like it's the reduction of worship and cultural importance that's weakened them. But no, the actual reason is that Lucian dropping Death Fog on the elves suddenly eliminated a huge amount of Tirsen Delius' worshippers. The gods don't lament their lack of cultural power anymore, so it doesn't feel like the people's preference for Lucian is meant to be a meaningful element at play. This actually undermines the story because what we later learn about Lucian and the Magisters is that they view the gods as tyrants and want to starve them of source to free the world of their influence. And the game ultimately supports this view of the gods, but we never see them in a dominant position. They're on the back foot from the God King, and the people of Rivellon don't care about them. We do learn about their abusive source with the afterlife, but the tyranny of the gods feels flimsier with so little demonstrated worship. And one would think that because of Lucian's perspective on the gods, he and the Magisters are making a concerted effort to reduce this worship, but again, if this is supposed to be happening, it's not really shown anywhere. And he's kept his anti-god knowledge hidden away from most of the rank-and-file Magisters anyway. One could argue that the people of Rivellon have become less reverent towards the gods ever since they saw, through Lucian, that a mortal could be elevated, and thus there was a greater sense of equality with the divine beings than there may have been before. This is a neat idea, but if that were the intent, I would expect, once again, to see characters actively reflect on this dynamic, or see differing perspectives on the matter from different cultures. Everything to do with the gods in this game just has a yawning lack, a disconnect with Rivellon that feels undermining to the stakes rather than intentionally depicting interesting socio-political or religious developments within the broader world. Spoilers for Pillars of Eternity until the timecode on screen, because I want to compare the Pantheon of Rivellon and the Pantheon of Aora. Both sets of gods are very similar. Neither began existence as gods. They are, in a sense, both fabricated figures of divinity. The Aoran gods were amalgamated soul constructs created to bring a sense of purpose and order to the world by an ancient civilization. The Rivellon gods... Rivellonian? The gods of Rivellon were members of an ancient civilization who gathered up a whole bunch of source energy for the sake of their own power. Both pantheons feed off the souls of mortals, though in Aora it's more of a sip as the souls travel through the wheel to be reincarnated, and on Rivellon the gods just outright devour the soul. The plots of both games hinge on the true nature of the gods and what you could call the original sins of how they came to power. Now, artificial embodiments of philosophical and moral ideals are inherently different from individual mages who gained a whole lot of power in terms of motivations and functions, and they serve different purposes for their respective stories. But something I think can be fairly compared is how Pillars of Eternity dedicates a lot of time to characterizing the various gods through both their worshippers and directly talking to some of them. In Divinity Original Sin 2, you only really get to interact with one god the entire playthrough, except if you're Lohse, in which case you get even more time dedicated to the demon Adramalik, and practically no interaction with the gods. This is really good for enhancing her storyline, but really bad for giving you any sort of investment or connection to the gods. Playing as Fane this time around, there is an extra layer of Fane knowing the gods before they were gods, which is interesting, but I wish I got to talk with more of them than just Amadia. I don't really know how much Amadia's scheming, self-interested nature is meant to characterize her specifically, or as a common trait among all of the gods, because I can't talk to them without starting up 4 entirely new playthroughs, and frankly this video has taken long enough to make. You could look up videos of each companion's conversation with their own god, but that doesn't change the fact that natural play of this game gives you so little characterization for the gods as a group. The only time you really get a chance to talk to any other gods is on the Nameless Isle, when you briefly get a conversation with each one if you go to each shrine. But it seems to be the case that if you visit the shrines after you've learned the combination to enter the academy another way, it just skips over these conversations. Except, thankfully, for Xanteza. and probably Vrogir, the gods of non-playable, not even in the game, species. The brief conversation with Xanteza was awesome, after a unique mini-dungeon in this machine-like crystal dimension that's also awesome. Her seeming disillusionment with her fellow gods is interesting, and it's the one real glimpse into the interactions between gods that we get, beyond your patron just telling you that it's every god for themselves now. Maybe this wouldn't feel like as much of a problem if I were more familiar with the other Divinity games, but maybe not because of the loose continuity of the series. As it is, it's just one more element that makes the gods feel strangely incidental and unimportant in a game all about acting as their chosen ones and witnessing their fall. At the very least, the gods do serve a purpose in the game's ultimate criticism of power. It is their pursuit of power that brought ruin to their own people when they cast all of their fellow Eternals into the void, twisting Fane's legitimate academic curiosity about Source into a mechanism for tyranny. And no matter what ending you choose, the game ends with them cast off and dead after they have manipulated and betrayed the Godwoken on the Nameless Isle. The Voidwoken are the fruits of their own misdeeds, and while the Voidwoken do not deal the final blow, they do set the gods on the path to their final deaths, put them in such a desperate state that they turn on each other and eventually on their chosen Godwoken. Power has made them cruel and petty and incapable of emerging out the other side of this conflict alive. If only they were characterized in a manner proportionate with their textual importance to the plot. Like in other RPGs, each companion has their own storyline that advances over the course of the game, as you travel with them and get to know them and talk to them. Unlike other RPGs, the companions almost never talk to each other. Red Prince goes, "Wow, Sebille is nuts," after she guts Stingtail, and then there's occasionally some very generic-sounding banter in reaction to certain environments, and that's just about it. Even asking Lohse, "What do you think about the people we've met?" only gives options to talk about NPCs like Malady, not other party members. Like every other companion you can ask this question to in every other RPG I've played. Companions don't really interject with their own thoughts in the middle of conversations either. Sometimes, after a plot event, you and each companion get to say one line in reaction, none of which ever play off what was said by any of the others. And also the window to do this seems to be fleeting, so let's say you've just survived a brutal fight and half the party is dead. By the time everyone is revived, you may have lost the chance to actually hear everyone's reactions. These moments feel so artificial, and also I rarely found them to be meaningful insights into any of the characters. At best, they just reiterated what I already knew about them. And to be fair, that's true of a lot of other companion interjections in other RPGs, but I think I dislike Original Sin 2's more, thanks to the combination of the artificiality of needing to prompt these remarks to all happen in a row, and the writing of them just generally feeling bland to me. Also, I noticed several of them feeling quite inconsistent. I'm not sure why Lohse, Sebille, and the Red Prince all reverse their stances towards the redeemability of Braccus' necromancers when it comes to Gratiana, for example. Or, most bafflingly, their reactions to learning the gods are consuming mortal souls. In earlier scenes, they could be rather dismissive towards the gods.
One of the gods said that.
Lohse huffs on her fingernails and buffs them on her tunic, smirking.
Nice. I think I'll call my next song, She Who Struck Fear in the Gods.
Their tale is one of scholars becoming gods. If they could, we can. Which is rather excellent.
Sun shines, gods lie. Where there's power, there's corruption. Had anyone here truly expected anything else?
But then, at the Nameless Isle Academy, Sebille and Lohse say this.
Jump to a conclusion and you might fall off a cliff. People do what they do for a lot of reasons. There might be more to this story.
Gods have a different vantage point from our own. Perhaps their actions will prove to be quite justified should we know their true reasons.
At least the Red Prince is consistent in his dismissiveness towards the gods, but why are Sebille and Lohse, after previously expressing their own dismissiveness to varying extents, suddenly willing to give them full benefit of the doubt upon the reveal of their greatest betrayal of mortal kind? These moments of interjection, the most common ways they'll interact with the narrative outside of their quests, feel useless for actually fleshing out their characters. I've been critical of RPG parties that don't have group dynamics, and the Godwoken probably have the least group dynamics in any RPG I've played from the last 20 years. Or at least those that put effort into making the companions distinct characters in the first place. Something like Wasteland 2 has even less in this regard, but also doesn't feel like it's even trying, so there's less to be disappointed by. There are a few details to be found regarding how some of the companions view each other in unique dialogue you get depending on which of them you're playing as. The one that comes to my mind now is that if you're playing as Lohse, when you meet Sebille and she reads your memories, she remarks that Lohse was eyeing her up. But with both as companions, there's no sign of attraction between them. There's no sign of anything between them. This is a shame because I think I glitched into romancing both of them this playthrough, and we should have had a proper throuple. Anyway, beyond this, the thinness of the companion remarks on other quest lines is another quality that makes them so flat as an RPG party, and it makes the development of some relationships with them feel more rushed when they do happen. Lohse is hit hard by this, as her quest is advanced on Blood Moon Island at the very end of Reaper's Coast, meaning without many smaller developments for her leading up to this, either in the form of spread out personal quest steps or more meaningful commentary on other quests, she's just there until suddenly you're the one pulling her back from an Adramalik-induced coma through the power of the friendship that I guess exists. Then she has nothing to do on the Nameless Isle, genuinely nothing at all, aside from deciding whether to be loyal to you at the Academy like every companion does. Then you can kiss her, and she's madly in love with you. At least Sebille and the Red Prince do advance their stories on the Nameless Isle, with Sebille outright finishing it there. But even so, for both of them in Reaper's Coast, they are, like Lohse, just extra bodies for combat until you find the couple of spots that advance their storylines. And because Reaper's Coast is so long, this means really long stretches of time where you're getting nothing from them. Their dialogue topics only update with their personal quests, and unlike Baldur's Gate 3, they don't have a wealth of alternate greeting lines that comment on recent happenings of other arcs. Lohse ended up being one of my biggest disappointments with this playthrough because I found her story while playing as her to be quite good. The demon who possesses her talks to you much more frequently, since he's the one you speak to in the God visions. He's well built up to as a consistent antagonist, certainly more so than any of the other game's villains. Even other recurring ones like Dallas, Friedemann, Alexandar, and Raymond aren't as richly characterized. He's a frighteningly intimate portrayal of emotional abuse as he tries to keep Lohse isolated from anyone else who could influence her positively. But with her as a companion, there's the bit where she's possessed to attack Sebille in Fort Joy and a couple of other moments, then basically nothing for all of Reaper's Coast until Blood Moon Isle because, again, her story doesn't progress until then. Dozens of hours doing other quests with no pop-in from a drama leak makes him more easily forgettable as a threat. Also, as a companion, Lohse is the resident comic relief who does the quirky quips, so if that annoys you, it's going to be rough slogging through to her still excellent final mission. Part of her deal is that she's a spirit medium, and that's how a drama leak found her to latch onto, but she never channels other spirits in the game, so I'm not sure what the point of that character trait of hers is. Maybe she could have been more of a viewpoint character into Rivellon's cosmology, or how demons work broadly instead of just a drama leak. Apparently a lot of their lore is defined in Divinity 2, as in the third game made in the series, not to be confused with Divinity Original Sin 2, a game released 8 years later that takes place before Divinity 2. I could be forgetting small bits that do feature demon explanations from a Lohse playthrough, but with her as a companion, I didn't get anything about her being a medium for any beings other than a drama leak. Sebille's quest requires going to the sawmill, where lone wolf assassin Roost has captured Sebille, even though last time we saw Sebille, she was still in Fort Joy and refused to escape with the party. How did she get out of Fort Joy and all the way over to the north end of Reaper's Coast in the time it took us to sail to the south end with a significant head start on her? I guess we have to assume that Malady taking the Lady Vengeance into the Hall of Echoes somehow extended our travel time, but it's not really presented that way. This weird NPCs beat you to your destination even though you leave first thing is pretty frequent in this game, and is also present in Baldur's Gate 3 when the Tieflings reach the titular city. At least in the Baldur's transition from Act 1 to Act 2, the Tieflings are actually going ahead of you, and you have to take a diversion either to Rosymorn or the Underdark, so it makes sense those that survive reach Last Light before you. But in Act 3, I have no idea how Alfira, Roland, Lacrissa, Dammon, and anyone else I'm forgetting made it into the city and got themselves set up with jobs before you get there. In Original Sin 2, these strange NPC teleportations happen more often, including twice with Sahala. But anyway, following Sebille's quest brings you to face Roost, and so does Ifan's if he's with you. If I'm remembering correctly, which a glance at Larian's forums tells me I am, if you have both of them in your party at the same time, only one of them actually gets to confront him. It doesn't prevent continuing the quest for the one who misses talking to him, but it does mean you miss story content. In contrast to the earlier similar moment where both Red Prince and Sebille have to talk to Stingtail, and a later moment where they both have to talk to the Shadow Prince on the Nameless Isle. But at least in both cases, Red Prince leaves in peace, so you can do both if Sebille just goes second. So again, competitive RPG design interfering with satisfying story moments and hindering companion development. At least in this current playthrough it doesn't matter because Ifan is dead. I'll talk about Sebille's arc in more detail when we reach its end on the Nameless Isle, but for now I want to say that I've come to find her the best written companion in the game, at least as a companion. I don't know what she's like as a player character. She has a clear character arc as she goes from ruthless assassin to a softer and more open person by facing her past. She has an engaging plot hook in hunting down the lizard that once enslaved her and made her an assassin in the first place. She has a connection to the elves that allows her to be a vessel through which we explore part of the setting, but is still her own person and not just this lore vessel. And her arc fully developing to its conclusion by the end of the Nameless Isle means the timing of the love scene right after that zone feels right for her, instead of weirdly early and unearned. She still suffers from these sparse-feeling character moments on Reaper's Coast, but at the very least, her quest is paced in such a way that she develops more naturally than the others I took with me on this playthrough. The Red Prince's story revolves around his prophetic dreams about an equally red princess, Sadha, who is encountered in Reaper's Coast. When they meet, he is immediately smitten, and they bang, and then it turns out that Sadha has thrown in her lot with the God King. While I'm sure that romancing the Red Prince and turning the situation into more of a love triangle makes the prince more interesting, as I played he was a cool enough companion thanks to his enjoyable personality, but his story felt lackluster. He's written almost like an Astarion prototype, but without the intricate portrayal of an abuse victim that gave Astarion the depth and fandom that he has. That element of Astarion is found in Sebille and Lohse instead, so I guess my party this playthrough is just Astarion decomposited into 3 different people. The Red Prince's arc is played as if he becomes humbler and wiser over the course of his journey, but I'm not sure why, since he really just learns how special he is. I suppose that when he does have to accept that Sadha went to the God King, he has to accept that he was wrong about her and that his power is more precarious than he initially acted, but that seems like a much less severe blow to his ego than his imprisonment and shipment to Fort Joy in the first place, so it feels a little flat. Fane is also an egotist who has to learn humility if he is to develop positively. It would feel off to try to talk about him too much as a companion when my memory of that is a bit hazy now, having experienced the story as him for this most recent run. His story is so connected to the main plot that he doesn't really have separate things to do on the Nameless Isle and in arcs, which can make him fade into the background in those areas. He is an ancient being, an eternal, who is inadvertently responsible for the rise of the gods and the creation of the Godwoken thanks to his research into Source. For the first half of the game, until confronting another of his people, Aetira, in the Black Pits, he's more of a quirky fish out of water, who views all the mortals alive today as primitive. As the player character, this is made clear in some of the Fane-tagged dialogue options, and especially in the conversation with Niles in Fort Joy, when you express annoyance with him for not understanding your need for a face ripper, which you don't actually need because you can retrieve the shapeshifter mask from Wendigo just outside the fort, and headgear always obscures your undead face even if it's a musketeer hat that clearly shows you're a skull. In some ways, Fane is the ideal player character of the Origin companions, since a lot of important dialogue checks are unlocked with his scholar or mystic character tags, and he ends up so tied to the main plot. He also has a unique relationship with the gods because he knew them back when they were all equal in power as non-deity Eternals. Though this does create a discrepancy with his character, since he was a scholar in his age, but scholar dialogue options often treat the character as a scholar of present Rivellon. Perhaps the biggest issue with Fane as a player character is that there is barely any real tension regarding what choices you will make about his personal story. His major dilemma is about whether he will betray the current people of Rivellon to side with the God King in the hopes of bringing the Eternals back from the Void. Fane is skeleton soulless, basically. The way you prevent this outcome if he's a companion is by bonding bonding with him and giving him a connection to the world of today. If you're playing as him, there's really nothing tempting you to go along with this aside from completionist curiosity about what his special bad ending looks like. I don't feel connected to eternal society like he is supposed to. I'll return to the arcs of Lohse, Sebille, and the Red Prince as they reach their ends. I just wanted to spend some time explaining why the process of exploring their arcs falls so flat compared to other RPGs, especially in Reaper's Coast. Before moving on to the Nameless Isle, a few final thoughts on the Reaper's Coast section. I appreciate the player-driven structure of this area. It makes sense that you can take your time to get to different areas because you aren't given an overarching ticking clock. You're exploring on your own time. So Original Sin 2 can follow in line with other sprawling RPGs that don't break immersion by giving an in-character plot timer yet endless real time for side quests. For any frustrations I have with how little a drama leak appears if you're not playing as Lohse, I think the details we get of him by visiting Blood Moon Isle and seeing the aftermath of his escape is quite cool build-up for who he is beyond Lohse's tormentor. It's also one of the more visually unique areas in the game, and the imprisoned sorcerer Rajarima giving you power if you free her only to turn on you and steal your source is a fun extra instance of blindly seeking power leading one into harm's way. I will say that the exact place demons have within the cosmology of Rivellon alongside the gods and Voidwoken is not well established at all. To some extent, this is on the game for not giving proper contextualization, but this is also on me for not having played any of the other Divinity games, assuming the demon lore from the old games is consistent. The overall picture presented to us of the Rivellon setting by the end of Reaper's Coast is one of selfish people and brutal violence, but with the possibility for good if it's worked for. Gareth can potentially descend into a rage-fueled monster if White Magister Jonathan kills his parents. With them dead, Gareth wants vengeance, but you can talk him down, and he goes back to the ship. Then you get to avenge them yourself, but it's arguably more to save Gwydion than out of hate, so it's fine. Is it worth talking about Sir Laura? His entire character was added as free DLC, and the only thing he does is follow you around and talk to you at roughly the transition point of every chapter, as long as you have Pet Pal, which lets you talk to animals. His story is one of several instances of the powerful cause injustice, the victims seek power for retribution, and become corrupted themselves narratives that appear throughout the game. In this case, these sapient civilizations chopped down a bunch of forests, and so some squirrels formed the Knights of Dre to make the Great Acorn destroy the world, but their hatred twisted them and they executed Laura's friend in Mount Quercus for being a different kind of animal from them. The narrative problem with Laura is that he's isolated to one-on-one conversations with the player, and all plot development happens off-screen and he just tells you about it. Granted, this does lead to the interpretation that his entire arc is a joke and he doesn't actually do anything and is just saying stuff. Cool. The gameplay problem with Laura is that he keeps setting off traps and makes the tile puzzle in Mortis's basement unnecessarily hard. He's got a fun voice performance, but nothing about his story covers ground that the rest of the narrative doesn't already cover, so he's a bit redundant thematically. I guess he gives more incentive for you to get the Pet Pal ability. Anyway, once you've gathered enough source power and levels, you depart Reaper's Coast, having either helped or devastated the place, or perhaps a bit of both. Your patron god has revealed to you that to win Divinity, you must go to the Nameless Isle. The Nameless Isle is a much smaller section, broken up into the various god shrines, the caves, and the academy. The Tir Sindelius shrine has become a refuge for thwarted pilgrims of the past, and most recently, the revived Alexandar and his magisters. The Black Ring, in service to the God King, have also set up shop on the island, led by the Sallow Man. The academy is where Divinity will be competed for. As I said before, visiting the shrines of the various gods is the only way you can get any meaningful characterization of the ones that aren't your patron, but if you learn the code to get into the academy from Alexandar or the Sallow Man, then most of them stop giving you the characterization scenes except Xanteza and Vrogir. This island seems to be the only place where people still care about the gods. The greater concentration of the faithful makes sense given the nature of the island, but because the people there don't speak of themselves as a last refuge of piety in a world that's turned away from the Seven, it still doesn't feel intentional. It feels like Larian just went, whoops, we forgot all the god worshippers in this game about becoming a champion of the gods. Here they all are, only when the gods are most plot relevant. One of the most interesting parts of the Tirsandelia Shrine is the Last Tiger, whom you catch right in the middle of swearing fealty to the God King to get revenge for the extermination of her people during the Death Fog bombing. And later the Salaman promises to improve you, which in practice means exchanging one of your character tags for another if you bring him Bishop Alexandar's head. Almira has already told us how the God King has been building his follower base, but in these two instances we are able to personally experience it from different perspectives. Seems rather fitting to include these scenes of direct recruitment on the island of people devoted to the 7 gods as a dark parallel, or darker, since all the gods suck on Rivellon. The God King feels more like a metaphor than a character, a broader component of the true enemy being the abstract concept of power. His known character traits are as follows. 1. He wants revenge against the gods for casting him and the other Eternals out of the world and into the void. 2. He is willing to make grand sweeping promises to potential recruits, but doesn't care about honoring them or making promises that cannot be reconciled with each other, so he is duplicitous and selfish. 3. He does not like to be disobeyed and insists on absolute, magically enforced eternal loyalty. 4. He does not like failure, and will cast aside people like Wendigo if he doesn't find them useful. There are a lot of villains in this game, and most are organized into 2 main factions, with the God King in charge of one of them and representing the greater existential threat. He is the unintended consequence of the pursuit of power, the example of someone seeking vengeance for a past wrong, now gathering those with broadly similar pasts to use as pawns. He doesn't have to be a super fleshed out character to fill this role, but I do wish I had more detail about one aspect of his backstory. What was he really like as King of the Eternals? The titular original sin is Fane disobeying the God King's wishes to keep the power of the Source in the Veil hidden and telling the future gods about it, who then turned around and overthrew their king and banished all of their own people to the Void, so they could rule alone over the mortal races they created to farm for Source. Since the king imprisoned Fane and probably also his wife and daughter before the 7 barons overthrew him to become the gods, the king could be read as tyrannical before his void corruption. But opening the veil to take its source was dangerous. In a sense, the king was right, and he was undone by not being more tyrannical in stripping the barons of their power as well. Maybe the gods wanted to rebel for their own power hunger. If so, that makes the king a victim turned cruel by the corruption of the void. Maybe the gods wanted relief from a tyrant but were too self-interested not to become tyrants themselves, and the God King was an authoritarian betrayed by new authoritarians. The last one seems most consistent with both characterization and the game's themes, but I'm not sure which is meant to be true. We get very few details one way or the other, and I would have appreciated just a little bit more to provide a more solid foundation for an interpretation of him. On the other end of the villain spectrum, we have the Magisters, who by this point are already starting to break up since we get the good Magisters on this island, led by a revived and apparently somewhat repentant Bishop Alexandar. He still acts pretty entitled though, still insisting that he is meant to be the divine. He pins the blame for his past endorsement of atrocity on Dallas and Vredeman, who found him easily manipulable, and swears that once he is divine, he will do better.
I never thought I'd follow him, not after Fort Joy, but he won over us veterans, Magister and Paladin alike. He's like a different man, now that he's found the path to divinity. He broke free from Dallas and Vredeman's influence, and they tried to murder him for it, them and their white magisters. Us loyalists had to stand by his side.
She had her accomplice, Vredeman, pose as someone who could train me how to master my god-woken powers. But it was a lie. They sought to hinder, not help. While I was being occupied by Vredeman, Dallas began taking over the Order.
Between Alexandar and the Salaman, Alexandar is certainly the more heroic, and his remorse does seem genuine, if tainted by his continued snobbish self-centeredness.
I am the only one who is worthy. I have to decide who lives and who dies, for the sake of the greater good. That is what true power demands of you.
We already know from some of the guards in Fort Joy that plenty of Magisters genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, so this good turn doesn't come out of nowhere, but most players will have seen the Black Pits unless they skipped it, and everyone will have heard him justify his atrocities on the way out of Fort Joy. The closest he can get to redemption is being talked into giving up Divinity and siding with you in the final trial, if he survives that far. Even if you kill him, you can talk to his spirit, and he is suddenly relieved and cordial, basically accepting his fate fate instead of raging at you for it. He's been given enough depth already for me to appreciate this as the man finally letting go of the obsession imposed upon him that he built his life around but never truly wanted. However, to me, the resonance of this moment is undermined by his recent absence in the narrative. We knew he survived Fort Joy and vanished from the Lady Vengeance, but all the Magisters in Reaper's Coast treat him as dead and he has no presence there, and by now we've basically moved on from him. The God King and a drama leak have become more clarified presences, and intrigue has built up about Queen Justinia's plans for the Death Fog, and Dallas's plans for the Aetiran device. When Alexandar pops back up largely defanged on the Nameless Isle, the feeling, at least for me, is less, oh no, he's back, and more, oh yeah, I forgot you were still alive. If he could survive the island and permanently join you on the Lady Vengeance as a tense ally, if he could be the Tairn Logain of Divinity, maybe it could lead to something really cool, but his story ended at Fort Joy and his epilogue does not go beyond the Nameless Isle, so this makes his reemergence even less substantial. To reiterate, Lohse does not advance her personal quest on the Nameless Isle, and I don't think Beast does either since none of the plot points on the island tie in with Queen Justinia, but maybe I'm wrong. Ifan gets to confront Alexandar, Vayne gets to learn that the Voidwoken are in fact his own people corrupted by the Void, as we've already discussed, which gives him a personal crisis as a companion and can just be brushed off if you're the one in control, and Sebille and the Red Prince both get to meet with the architect of their pain. The same guy, in fact, a lizard named the Shadow Prince. Alongside Alexandar and Adramalik, I'd say the Shadow Prince is the game's best villain, in part because he shows consistent yet distinct sides of himself depending on if he's talking to the Red Prince or Sebille. The Prince is roughly his peer, despite his orchestration of the Prince's arrest for consorting with demons.
I suppose I should start with an apology for the attempts on your life. Talk about getting off on the wrong foot, wouldn't you say?
Failed attempts, remember? Hardly made me break a sweat, those lackeys of yours.
To my astonishment, and I admit my admiration. You may find this hard to believe, but given different circumstances, I would have been quite content to let you live. Let you play the Emperor from your golden throne in your golden city.
The Shadow Prince is calm and polite, if condescending, towards his counterpart. He adjusts to the fact that the Red Prince has survived his efforts to exile him and has decided to try reasoning instead, telling the Red Prince not to breed dragons with Sadha, the Red Princess. Meanwhile, Sebille is of another species and someone he kidnapped, brainwashed, and abused in an effort to utterly destroy her people. To her, he is utterly cruel and wants nothing more than to crush her and bring her under his power once again.
I don't begrudge you your freedom, Sebille, but you came looking for me driven by no more than ordinary bloodlust. All you see is red. You've lost sight of all reason. You know how the scar works. You know I have but to sing a single tune. You've no hope whatsoever of defeating your master.
Talking to him with the Red Prince can easily end peacefully, but talking to him with Sebille will end in violence. But with both characters, the Shadow Prince is consistent as a zealot for the stability and safety of the Lizard's ancient empire at any cost. He decided to use Sebille to wipe out the Elves' Scions and the Mother Tree out of a belief, apparently not an unfounded one, that the Mother Tree wants to dominate the world, which would of course threaten the ancient empire. The power represented by the Scions and the Mother Tree, even with the elves' diminished population, is such that the Shadow Prince deems it necessary to destroy them. On the other hand, he fears the potential for the Red Prince and Princess to mate and produce dragons because in the past, the dragons were a powerful dominating force in Rivellon who were attacked and diminished into lizards. If dragons return, others might unite against the ancient empire again. So the Shadow Prince becomes the clearest example of both sides of the power makes you a target idea I mentioned before, being both targeter and someone who fears being targeted. However, there's another part to Sebille's story on the island that feels very poorly presented. After she's been telling you about the Shadow Prince's control of her and his hatred of elves, you then speak to the Mother Tree in Tyrsendelius' shrine, who tells you he's trying to kill her and asks you to end the threat he poses. And as soon as you exit that chamber, Sahala shows up. Before, she seemed reverent to the ancestor trees. But now, she is suddenly urging you to kill the Mother Tree, calling her a tyrant, saying this is the only way elves can be free. Sebille is actually telling the truth here, but when I first played, I was absolutely convinced that this was a trick by the Shadow Prince, some illusion he cast. You're telling me I'm just supposed to accept Sebille showing up out of nowhere, expressing completely different desires to what she expressed before, asking me to do exactly what we know the Shadow Prince wants, right after hearing about how he controlled and manipulated Sebille and also his name is the Shadow Prince?
I don't trust like that.
But no, we're supposed to take Sebille at her word. The dilemma is not, do we believe or disbelieve this extremely suspicious request, it's, do we end the chief authority of the elves in their time of weakness to set them free, even if it costs them firm leadership they may rely on? It's very unclear. I guess the Lady Vengeance does say some words supporting this characterization of the Mother Tree, but that conversation can very easily be overlooked. What you do with the Mother Tree determines how Sebille's storyline resolves, as after the Shadow Prince dies, she must choose whether to accept her role as scion in service to the Mother Tree, eventually growing into a new Mother Tree to succeed the old, or to reject this role and live free, at which point the tree's servants will attack. The fact the tree doesn't take rejection well certainly lends legitimacy to the tyrant accusation. I think the game is meant to be nudging the player towards killing the tree and setting Sebille free, after her lifetime trying to escape the role imposed on her by her people and then by the Shadow Prince. She certainly deserves her freedom. There is some validity to the idea that Sebille has been running from her responsibilities all her life, and so the most satisfying resolution is for her to stop running and accept her role instead. But this means accepting a role of great power, and given the rest of the game, is that for the best? It's not presented as a bad ending when you choose it, and killing the Mother Tree really does feel like kicking the elves when they're down, especially because the Shadow Prince wants this outcome too, and because doing so turns the entire rest of the Tirsen Delius shelter hostile to you. But the surrounding context from the rest of the game definitely casts Sebille accepting the role of new Mother Tree in a suspicious light. It's kind of like a lesser version of the dilemma we can see at the end of Deus Ex, about uncertain freedom versus possibly benevolent authoritarianism. In the context of a game all about how power is bad, the choice is clear. Unless, of course, you think the Shadow Prince was trying to trick you the whole time, because that's what it looks like. As for what it means for Sebille herself, it's meaningful that as she describes the expectations she lived under as Prime Scion, she portrays the life of an object of worship as, appropriately, highly objectifying.
It's a very lonely thing, indeed, to be the object of a people's worship. What is revered is feared at the same time.
After you've gained access to the Eternal Academy on the island, you have to find your way to the center to begin the last trial to claim divinity. Inside, there are the ghosts of several Godwoken who reveal that Lucian killed all of them sometime before his own apparent death, presenting us with the first focused depiction of his less than benevolent side. You can also discover Lucian's writings on the gods, which is where we officially learn that the gods have been treating mortal souls like farmable crops. If you weren't already suspicious of the gods and Lucian, both of them are firmly established to be unworthy of idolization, especially the gods. When you reach the center of the temple, you find that whichever companions died escaping Fort Joy have been brought back as undead in service to the God King, presumably having accepted his deal to bring them back in the hopes of fixing their unfinished business. Now, I get this for Beast, whose ghost expressed panic about not being able to figure out and stop whatever Queen Justinia has been planning. Sure, her plans are actually the God King's, so it's not like he could actually stop her by becoming sworn, but as I've said, the God King doesn't care about keeping his promises compatible. What I don't get is why Ifan would accept the God King's deal, since when you talk with his ghost, he seems more relieved of the burden of his unfinished business, kind of like Alexandar. Bringing the companions back as enemies is an interesting idea at least, and would probably hit way harder if their deaths could in any way be narratively laid at the player's feet. If this was more of like a Mass Effect Vermeer situation, where you actually had to make a choice about knowingly sending a companion to their death, seeing them brought back as your enemy would be more effective. As it is now, it's just kind of like Alexandar's return, where you just go, oh huh, you're back. Anyway, time to die again. What's most interesting about the returning companions is that they are actively nastier people here, implying some degree of personality corruption happens to the Sworn. Maybe Mortis and Wendigo used to be better people too. Maybe so did the Sworn we meet later in arcs.
For a moment, Isbale appears almost relaxed. Her eyes flash blue, her face quivers.
Isbale? My queen, forgive me, I
Sebille screams in pain and clutches her head. She bobs and sways, muttering to herself. You can make out few words, but you recognize the language. It is the eternal tongue.
The covenant will be kept. I serve you with living and dying breath. My king, glory be to you.
Or maybe not, since Almira and Sadha don't seem to be affected in this way, and Linder Kem's initial desire that led him to the God King is pretty terrible. This leads into a race to the big Divinity box, or whatever it's called, where half the power of all the gods has been stored to be claimed by whichever Godwoken is to become the new divine. The Wellspring, that's its name. You have to fight off the revived former companions, Alexandar if he's still alive and not persuaded to help you, and also any of your companions that you have not formed a positive relationship with by advancing their quests, and some robots. This is basically the climax of the game-long idea that you are competing with your party members, and possibly multiplayer friends, to be the divine. It's a fun idea. In a game where Larian had truly committed to the multiplayer structure, things would have been rearranged to make this the climax, where you and your friends finally turn on each other for ultimate power, like the Mustafar level in the original LEGO Star Wars or something. When someone reaches the Divinity box, Dallas and Wiedemann appear out of nowhere before you can absorb its power, and what happens next is one of the most important plot points in the game and also one of the most confusingly presented. Dallas uses the Aetiran device that she got from Aetira's tomb in the Black Pits to absorb the section of the god's power set in the Wellspring for you to claim, but she doesn't absorb it into herself, she instead takes the source-filled Aetiran with her to Arx, and the gods panic and decide to kill you and absorb your still plentiful Godwoken source pool as a last resort. But you fight back the manifestations of the four gods who come after you, and the last one of them standing ends up going super mode, and when you kill it, the god in question actually dies for real. Then almost immediately after, the rest of the gods die too, somehow. I summarize those details because the key plot points of Dallas stole the source energy into the Aetiran to take it somewhere else, and the last god you defeat actually dies and then the other gods die after, I guess, are not clear at all in the moment and are hastily conveyed in expositional dialogue after the fact. It looks like Dallas just blows up the Wellspring, and the possibility that the gods are vulnerable to real, actual death at your hands is not hinted at. So when Malady just says matter-of-factly that we killed a god as if it was supposed to be obvious, I just went,
At least you managed to murder one of the seven.
Wait, what? The god controlling it is dead by your hand.
Hang on, what? Wait.
I thought these were just avatars of their power, that's why they all look like the party and not like the gods. So what do you mean that the god actually died? And how come Malady makes it clear that it's just the one final god at first, and then later on she says that they're all dead? Did the rest get aneurysms while I was busy having skeleton sex with Lohse? Did we come so hard we blew their minds too?
Here I am, all of me.
Can you see all of me? Walk into my mystery.
With hindsight, okay, I understand the notion that the gods are so drained of source after staving off the Voidwoken, and so desperate after seeing the huge source reserve of the Wellspring stolen away before they could steal it from you themselves, that they are putting everything they have into this one attack so there's nothing left of them when it fails. One final demonstration of their compulsive, self-destructive self-interest that set all this in motion to begin with. But there is no setup that this outcome for them is even possible until after it happens. If there was proper setup that I missed, it must be quite obscure because I went into this playthrough remembering this exact problem and looking for any extra context, and I didn't come across anything. Also, the destruction caused by Dallas stealing the Divinity box destroys the entire Nameless Isle. So, it's fine, actually, that I killed the Mother Tree and everyone else in the Tyr Sindelius temple because they were going to die anyway. Malady brings the Lady Vengeance back into the Hall of Echoes to escape and make the trip to the city of Arx, capital of the human civilization and the place Dallas took the Aetiran to. As I said, the fact that only Sebille's arc can really be complete at this point makes romance with at least Lohse, and probably with everyone else, feel very rushed. I don't think a fix for this would be to have everyone's arc get finished on the Nameless Isle, or the romantic scene being pushed to later. It's just that companion interaction has to be beefed up before this point. Like in, for example, Baldur's Gate 3. During this little break, Malady has a slight update to her rhetoric about power. Whereas before, she was more blasé about the responsibility that comes with power, gently encouraging the Godwoken to allow themselves to pursue their desires, she now expresses a more balanced view.
Chaos is a fact of life, surer than any other. Power is one of the few structures that can cut a line through that chaos. If wielded well, that line will mean stability, order, a comfort against the unknowable, changing forces of chaos. If wielded poorly, the line will mean domination, terror, different from chaos, but no better. Dallas, and the others like her, Alexandar, the Mother Tree, the Prince of Shadows, they are little better than demons, really. They seek power at the expense of others, not to create stability, but to create servants.
There's a lot that's left deliberately vague about Malady in this game. We know she's half demon, and this is where her ability to open passage to the Hall of Echoes comes from. We know that she has some familiarity with Adramalik and the Advocate, since on Blood Moon Isle, we see her trying to negotiate part of a deal with the Advocate, and she figures out how to weaken Adramalik in Arx. But though she seems to have a deal with Adramalik, killing him to get out of it is not her ultimate goal. She still wants a favor from the Godwoken should they become divine to deal with her true problem. Her status as an unresolved mystery makes her ultimately an extended sequel tease, which makes it strange that she can actually die in this game. If you don't expand your source enough in Reaper's Coast because you've turned down too many source masters, Malady resorts to selling the rest of her soul to find the Nameless Isle instead, which leaves her without what she needs to survive transporting the Lady Vengeance to Arx. It's not that the next Divinity game would necessarily account for this rare outcome, since none of them have done save imports and there is in fact a canon ending, but still, in all other outcomes, her goals are played as this will be relevant for the next game. Time will tell if this is actually what the upcoming Divinity is, but since Malady is voiced by Amelia Tyler, Baldur's Gate 3's beloved narrator, I'm sure Larian will bring her back. It's sufficient enough for this game that Malady is a morally ambiguous person with a heart of gold who tries to hide that heart and wants someone with great power to be in her debt. It's also a fun, if common, twist on prototypical genre conventions to have your main mentor figure be this more cynical and selfish person, rather than a classic be good and do good figure. Malady is reflective of the cynical portrayal of Rivellon as a whole in this game. I really like city sections in RPGs. I think it's because there's often a higher quantity of conversation-based quests and storytelling, which gives more opportunity for character role-playing, but there's also always opportunities for combat when necessary in back alleys and sewers and what have you. The higher quantity of conversations means there's a lot of opportunities to learn more about the setting and the types of people who inhabit it, and because cities tend to be the centers of power, there's often interesting political lore or significant plot developments. I like Defiance Bay and Negataka in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. I like the Citadel in Mass Effect, Denerim in Dragon Age Origins. I even like the Demon City in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous and Act 3 in Baldur's Gate 3 when you go to Baldur's Gate, even though fans generally seem to dislike those sections of those games. Elu Shinria is cool, and it's the one part of the game where the Crusade management is totally absent, so it's an old school you and your party alone in a strange city setup. I like it, I don't care. Anyway, I think Arx is decent. There's some of the good RPG city stuff here, like getting more texture to the culture by seeing people praying in the cathedral to Lucian and a little to the gods, which may be some actual textual evidence for the idea I articulated before about a religious shift. The city is set up strangely, though. In most CRPG cities, the game makes it clear that we're not seeing the entire thing, only what's relevant, either through zoned city maps like in Pillars of Eternity, or sections you can't visit but are in the skybox like in Baldur's Gate 3. This means that engine limitations and simple pragmatic world designs that only include the essentials do not make the player feel like a major city is tiny. A game like Skyrim suffers slightly from not being able to do this, from its game design requiring full explorability and thus preventing these abstractions. Even the Imperial City in Oblivion or New Vegas in New Vegas should be way bigger in perfectly lore-accurate depiction. For some reason, Arx is designed like a Skyrim city instead of an isometric RPG city. It's built on a series of islands that are fully explorable, meaning there's no visual trick telling us that this city is bigger than what we're visiting with inaccessible skybox buildings. So Linder Kem's mansion actually makes up an entire fourth of the whole city. This makes some story details come across as silly, like the class conflict we learn about between Magisters and Paladins. You see, the Magisters are made up primarily of commoners, and part of the hostility between them and the Paladins goes beyond the Magisters abusing their power and Lucian's perceived legacy to commit atrocities, it's also because the paladins are made up of the city's elite, and they look down on the magisters. This adds some extra texture to the magisters' ideology, as those who revel in their cruelty are likely expressing joy about being the ones with power to abuse for once, while those who truly believe that destroying sorcerers will stop the Voidwoken are likely motivated by recognizing dangers their loved ones are more vulnerable to as commoners. Meanwhile, Linder Kem signs up with the God King specifically to keep the nobility at the top of society. He swears his soul purely out of classism. Kem represents those powerful who want to dominate, who have no sense of worth without someone under them, and will ruin themselves rather than allow those they deem lesser to become elevated. The reason I say the city design makes this plot point feel a little silly is, well, where are all the estates of the fancy pants paladins? We could explore the whole city and I don't see, like, a Bridgerton-style Mayfair district of noble houses. Do they all crowd into Kem's absurdly huge estate like a fantasy frat house? Why is the Ross estate the only other manor in the city? I guess the most reasonable answer is that the nobility have their own properties all across Rivellon. They don't live in the city per se, they just send whichever of their number joins the paladins. But still, the city is designed to only have buildings relevant to quests, which means there's a consulate for the ancient empire, but no sign of any embassy for the dwarves or elves, not even abandoned and repurposed structures meant to indicate a collapse of international relations. The biggest structures aside from Kem's Manor are the cathedral and lizard consulate, which makes sense being big buildings, and Adramalik's lair where he hides out as possessed demonologist Dr. Deva. I get that Deva was a respected figure and Adramalik is taking advantage of that, but would he really get his very own island to build an estate on that is as big as the city's entire harbor? It's world designed for gameplay efficiency without regard for narrative verisimilitude, and it's not the biggest problem in the world, but clearly Larian decided for a more balanced approach for Baldur's Gate 3, and I would hope they would do the same for the next Divinity. It's neat that the Magister Paladin Civil War is said to be instigated by you informing the Paladins of what went on in the Black Pits, and since Linder Kem serves the God King, this turns out to have been a situation of just empowering one group of villains instead of calling in the good guys to help. Though this happens no matter what, even if you don't help tattle on the Magisters, so Kem probably had other pretexts in the chamber. Aside from Kem, the God King's main servant in Arx is Isbeel, the advisor to Dwarven Queen Justinia, who has been influencing her queen to set up a horrific death fog attack in Arx by making her fear that if they don't strike first, the Divine Order could do their own death fog attack like they did to the elves. As I said already, there seems to be an arms race set off by Lucien's display of terrible, devastating power. Isbeel's presence does mean the game partly absolves Justinia of her described tyranny, and if you let her pass after killing Isbeel, she's basically treated as redeemed, but at least she seems set on the notion of undoing the harm she caused. This likely plays better if Beast is still around, but he's busy singing tunes in the Hall of Echoes right now. Also, in the endings where you don't become divine, Justinia gets killed by rivals anyway. One more interesting bit in Arx is the trapped Godwoken Charon. He was the first sorcerer that the Seekers had recruited and trained to possibly become the next divine, but his display of power was a hateful lashing out, and the Seekers deemed him a liability and imprisoned him.
It was Gareth that brought him to us. Charon, the first God-woken the Seekers found. He ate our food, he enjoyed our fellowship. We nurtured him and taught him.
We elevated him, presented him to the Order. Here he is, we cried, a claimant to divinity. Lucien's cathedral wouldn't remain empty for long. We were certain of it.
We were giddy, high on our own success. We should have seen the massacre coming, but we didn't. Charon the Divine, said the Seekers. I was flattered. My ego loved the idea. And the power. I wanted it. I gods damned craved it. And the Seekers delivered it on a silver platter. Gareth couldn't wait to show me off to the Order.
He's similar to the Djinn. He is everything that can go wrong with elevating a fallible mortal sorcerer to revered Godwoken status, filling their head with dreams and training them to be dangerously powerful. He's Tai Lung, basically. And he's one of the biggest examples of why the Seeker's approach of finding the good, all-powerful divine candidate may be flawed, may be vulnerable to simply replacing one tyrant like Alexandar or Dallas with another. Also, Sahala somehow made her way to Arx, I guess having left the Nameless Isle before you entered the academy. If you've killed the Mother Tree and freed the elves from her expansionistic desires, Sahala is ranting about wanting to wage bloody vengeance against the world anyway, after which Sebille dismisses her as a zealot. I truly have no idea who Sahala is supposed to be as a character. She veers from a wise sage in Fort Joy to a voice for her people loyal to the Mother Tree on Reaper's Coast, to suddenly a rebel seeking freedom for the elves on the Nameless Isle, and now a vengeful extremist in Arx.
The mother wants vengeance. She is hollow. But all elves want is to live. We shall harrow the earth with the blood of humans, lizards, and dwarves, and from it a new forest shall grow.
She only feels consistent going from Fort Joy to Reaper's Coast. The other shifts don't feel like the same character at all. The culmination of the Red Prince's storyline is the reunion with Sadha within a dream realm in which she's been hiding from the God King. She's already laid a dragon egg that only needs the Red Prince's fire breath to fully hatch, which makes me wonder how much time is supposed to have passed since the encounter with her on Reaper's Coast when they actually mate. Maybe dragon gestation is really fast. But anyway, the Red Prince can become the father of dragons, and free Sadha from the God King's service as long as the party has a Swornbreaker. When I tried to see what happens if you choose to destroy the egg instead, Red Prince turned on me and I had to kill him, meaning he doesn't get an alternate ending at all. But there are ending variants on YouTube that don't mention his dragons, so maybe I would have needed to try to turn him against Sadha in prior conversations earlier in the game for him to go along with this. Or maybe just not finish his quest, I'm not sure. But seeing both versions of the ending, the prince becoming the father of dragons seems to be treated as his good ending. And this is odd considering Sebille's quest and other examples of dangerous power in the game being presented more ambiguously. The Red Prince promises that he will raise the dragons to be responsible and not creatures to be feared, and this is indeed borne out by his ending slide.
Congratulate me, for take my word for it that I will treat my offspring with care. My children. I will teach them to be wise. I will teach them to be prudent. I will tame their flames.
Soon, Prince became Emperor, one who would not use his dragons for conquest. His realm knew peace, and the world did not burn.
But I don't know. Trust me bro, this power will totally be used responsibly feels like an out-of-place resolution when that attitude is treated with suspicion by most of the rest of the game. It also kind of makes it feel like the Red Prince doesn't have an arc. Sure, interpersonally he warms up to the player as a friend, and I'd assume the other companions if they ever interacted with each other, but he goes from exiled prince now forced to live without his usual comforts to learning he has a special destiny to single-handedly bring new glory to the ancient empire with the power of his crimson-scaled penis, and then the ending to his story is that he does. If it were played as him consciously refusing to learn his lesson, that would be an interesting twist on the standard snob learns humility arc they're going for, but that's not what happens. We're just lucky he seems to lose a little of his sense of superiority enough to want to be a responsible dragon dad, coincidentally as he gets everything he wanted. Now, I was happy to see that Lohse's finale remains as excellent as I remembered. It's possibly still one of the best narrative sections I've seen Larian do, even including Baldur's Gate 3. The staging of Malady leading you into Adramelech's Candle Pocket dimension is excellent, where he keeps the candle souls of all the people he's trapped in his deals and manipulations to feed off for power, and you slowly learn that in order to weaken him, you have to blow out these candles and permanently destroy the souls of these victims. First, you see just one candle, and you learn who it belongs to, and Malady and Lohse reason that it's a worthy sacrifice to make Adramelech killable so he can't do this to anyone else. Then there's two more candles, and the same thing, and then...
all those souls.
It's difficult to do deliberate cinematography with a player-controlled rotating isometric camera, but this still feels like a cinematic reveal, and the dilemma it sets up is great. Do you commit mass slaughter, going beyond killing to outright erasing Adramelech's victims from all walks of life, or do you step away but put yourself in monumentally more danger during the upcoming fight? It's interesting that Lohse is horrified by going through with it, but almost immediately justifies it to herself and then acts like everything is fine.
Regret? No. Wish I hadn't had to. Well, yeah, of course. Those people were just like me. They got too close to something evil, and they couldn't keep themselves safe from it. I couldn't help them, but I can stop him from taking any more people. Never again. That's my promise to them. Never again.
Let's get him, Chief.
I don't think these lines fully convey the idea she's repressing her guilt, if she is, but Lohse is realistically flawed in that she is more selfish than she would like to think. Maybe it just is easier for her to put this out of her mind. You have to tell her to leave right away to get her to refuse to extinguish all these candles. If you linger for just a little bit, she will decide to go through with it. The moral choice is a perfect example of the whole "the dark side is quicker and easier" idea that we saw earlier, except it's way more effective here. Fighting a drama leak without weakening him is indeed much harder, arguably the toughest fight in the game, but it can be done, especially if the game glitches and lets you kill off all his nurses while he's in conversation with Lohse and the main character. You have to kill him in 3 turns or he will permanently possess Lohse and she's lost from your party for good. Or you can rush down his armor and keep turning him into a chicken to reset the possession timer. Chicken Claw and Ruptured Tendons, best combo in the game. A drama leak gets fewer chances to shine if you're not playing as Lohse, but he still comes across as a bitterly real portrait of a slimy, manipulative creep, and it's great to take him down, especially without having blown out all the candles. And when he falls, the singer Lohse is finally free to sing.
Come to me, the night is dark. Come to me, the night is long. Sing for me, I'll sing along. Sing for me, oh sing for me.
I don't know if my game glitched on Fort Joy, or if the scene of a drama leak interrupting Lohse singing and forcing her to smash her loot only happens if you're playing as her, but it didn't happen for me this playthrough, and I only know about it because I remember it from last time. Without it, her triumphant song here loses a lot of its impact, so I hope it was just bad luck on my playthrough. There is at least one other scene where she's forced not to sing, but the scene with the loot really is the better one. Previously, I thought Lohse was the best written companion, but now I think that only applies if you're playing as her. Player Lohse is still the most emotionally impactful experience in the game, at least from what I've seen, but as companion, Sebille wins out. I don't have much to say about what it takes to reach Lucien's tomb, aside from the fact that the Path of Blood, which only admits people nebulously pure of heart, is deliberately designed to be impossible to pass. It's an encapsulation of Lucien's, and I believe the game's, ultimate views on source energy. Nobody is worthy. And for someone seeking power, nobody's hands are clean. So after cheating your way past, either with Arhu's secret bypass or by manufacturing a brand new custom party member who's never killed anybody to scroll on through, you pass through a couple more chambers and you are face to face with Lucien, and Dallas, and Rivellon. And now the game has to characterize all 3 of them with 3 different plot twists in the space of like 15 minutes. It does not succeed. Lucien the Divine has not actually died.
What a twist.
He hatched a plan to dethrone the gods and purge all source from the world after he learned the truth of their origin from Dallas, who is not the real Dallas. She is an eternal Lucien found sealed away in a tomb just like Fane, because she's Fane's daughter.
Aren't they just full of surprises?
Whom he does not seem to remember the name of since he only calls her daughter. Good characterization for Fane as an absolutely terrible father, bad for anyone who wants to talk about the character's true identity since we still only know her as Dallas. We never learn her true name. Anyway, Dallas told Lucien how the gods ascended, and he began to hatch a plan to drain all source from them and the rest of the world. The mass death of elves via death fog letting Void Woken in prompted him to fake his death and start having the Magisters start killing off sorcerers, including eventually his own son, while he hid in his tomb, continuing to drain source from the gods. Once all source is purged from the world, it will seal the tear in the veil, locking away the God King and the Void Woken forever. Also, Dallas forced the necromancer Tarquin to resurrect Braccus Rex to get access to his old source purging techniques and have him sniff out the Aeteran device. Then, instead of immediately killing him, they kept this notorious Source King around, allowing him to betray them right now and reveal himself as sworn to the God King. The fact that the game saves almost all of this information until this scene results in a cavalcade of exposition that lessens the impact of each reveal by making them share space with each other. That Rivellon is Braccus Rex can at least be revealed earlier if you find Dallas's journal in the Magister Barracks archives and then go confront Tarquin about his role in the resurrection. Tarquin wants to rebuild the Anathema Sword as a weapon to use to fix his mistake and kill Braccus, which you can bring into the final battle and then completely forget about like I did. So all of the indirect characterization we got for Braccus on Fort Joy was not just background lore, it was also setting up the mighty Source King before we meet him once again, in this lesson form, pressed into service by Dallas and Lucian, and then swearing himself to the God King to try to get revenge. One could see the Source King's depiction as the end state of searching for power, hollowed out into a mere tool for others who find the power useful, long past the heights he hollowed himself out to seek. One could also see the Source King's depiction as just shallow, evil bad guy with no depth and contributing nothing of substance to this ending, but providing a final avatar for the God King who isn't ever confronted directly, and thus serving as just a distracting extra to the plot reveal bonanza who is disposed of as quickly as he is properly introduced.
Both is good.
We really should have learned Dallas's true identity earlier, at least with Fane in the party. I imagine if you let him die after Fort Joy, it wouldn't mean much for her to reveal to you that she's his daughter. There are a handful of bits of characterization from stray remarks from NPCs or her journals, but most of them just convey that she's cruel and evil, like her enslaving the Lady Vengeance or ordering the Magisters to do horrible crimes. The exceptions to this are the books you can find in her cabin, the treatise on democracy, and her journal about feeling affinity for Braccus Rex. There's an imprisoned sorcerer on Fort Joy who apparently knew the real Dallas when they were kids, who remarks on how much her old friend has changed, which isn't so much characterization as it is foreshadowing for the fact that the real Dallas, whom we as players never knew before, has been killed and replaced by someone else whose name we don't know, and so whom we have no choice but to also call Dallas. Hey, the ending slides do. If he's around, Dallas gets to express her anger towards Fane for how his actions resulted in her and her mother also being punished, and it works fine for what it is, but this is the one singular moment we see Dallas where she isn't sneering at us and kicking puppies. Imagine if she also had a side quest dedicated to revealing her true nature in arcs like Braccus did. That could also serve as a proper companion quest for Fane, instead of him having nothing and then just having a Voidwoken show up before the Final Confrontation that asks him to let them all back into Rivellon at the cost of the existing mortals, and then Dallas yelling at him. It might go a long way to actually giving Fane decent motives for sacrificing the world for the Voidwoken if he got more than a couple lines sandwiched into this tomb scene dedicated to grappling with what has happened to his family and what his daughter has become. Dallas is one of many big plot twists in fiction that don't give us enough room to really sit with it and absorb the full implications because these twists come last minute, leaving the reveal feeling rushed and shallow. And then there's Lucian. He asks the player to agree to sacrifice their source, even though it will hollow them out into a silent monk, to end the threat of the Voidwoken and the danger of source-empowered tyrants like Braccus Rex, Riker, Charon, or, Lucian, forever. In this scene, Lucian presents himself as duplicitous, callous, willing to commit atrocities and harm his own devotees, sacrifice his own son to achieve his noble goals of freeing and saving mortal kind. He may feel bad about what he's been doing, but marches forward anyway. The cruelty at Fort Joy was not an aberration of his will, it was a realization of it. The great hero is a false idol, and if he is to get his way, he will re-emerge and reassert himself as leader of the Divine Order, and the vague, undefined, multicultural but mostly human kingdom that the Order, I guess, is the government of. He may purge the world of source power, but the political power he has exerted to abduct, torture, and kill innocent sorcerers, to drop Deathbog on the elves, to enable the massacre of the Black Pits, is intact and will be openly wielded by him once again. The game has depicted the Magisters versus the Black Ring as a clash between two groups of villainous tyrants, where the former side at least has understandable motivations and the latter side will literally destroy the world if it wins. Original Sin 2 has never let us forget the Magister's cruelty, even as it reveals more of the threat of the God King and his servants. And here, even though we have the option of just giving up and siding with Lucian, he is presented as antagonist, and his offer of the party all becoming silent monk husks while he gets to become king of the world again is one that seems tailor-made to be rejected. If you don't side with Lucian, you have to fight him, Dallas, Vredeman, and a few other Magisters until Dallas or Vredeman lose enough health. Then Vredeman reveals he's Braccus, breaks free from Dallas's control while announcing his fealty to the God King, and summons the huge Void Kraken that sunk the Merryweather at the start of the game, as well as the sworn spirits of several of the God King's servants you have defeated throughout your journey. If you do side with Lucian, you just skip to Braccus rebelling, and Lucian and Dallas will help you instead of still being hostile to you, making the final battle easier. After killing Braccus, you get to choose your preferred ending, and we finally get to see whether Lucian is meant to be correct. Lucian is meant to be correct, and it's in a way that kind of breaks the game's exploration of power. Let's broadly summarize what happens in each ending. If you refuse to even touch the power of divinity, the God King interferes and takes the power for himself, laughing at the party for their weakness and taking over the world. If you're playing as Fane, the game treats this as Fane accepting the God King's offer to rejoin him and becoming one of his lieutenants in the new world. Fane's player character also gets an ending to bring the Voidwoken back without the God King, which still results in the mortals being attacked and beginning to die off, so all the other party members and allies still hate Fane and are trying to find ways to fight back. Meanwhile, claiming divinity gives you the choices to become divine, disperse source power equally to everybody in Rivellon, or do what Lucian wanted and expel source, and consequentially, all of the Voidwoken from the world forever. Becoming divine results in an anti-Voidwoken alliance forming to fend off constant attacks from them, with the political alliances holding but places like Driftwood becoming overrun. You become powerful, you seem to unite the world at least for a time, but the threat of the Voidwoken remained in perpetuity. If you disperse source to everybody, the world is able to defeat the Voidwoken and things seem good for a while, but soon wars break out as people try to consolidate more source within them, break the equality, and accumulate power for themselves. The Red Prince puts it quite succinctly in this ending.
Don't fool yourself. In the absence of a master will rise. King, god, there is still power to be had. As long as there is power, there is conflict.
The final ending results in everything Lucian said would happen if you purge the world of source. The Voidwoken are gone for good, and the world generally prospers. There are a couple moments of tension, like Sebille still wanting revenge on the humans and the elves generally being distrusting of them, but for the most part, all the ending slides show things working out even better than in other endings. Consider the subtle difference between the Almira endings, as long as you've helped her with the Swornbreaker. Here's what happens if source is distributed, which for Almira goes the same if you reach divinity.
The locals liked and respected Almira. She never wanted for help, and deals always fell to her favor. Outsiders were often suspicious, but no local would speak against her.
And here's her ending if source is purged.
The locals liked and respected Almira. She never wanted for help, and deals always fell to her favor. She presumed she had them in thrall. The truth was, they just liked her.
It may be an odd thing to focus on, but I do think this approach is emblematic of the anti-power ethos that has existed throughout the game, by showing that with her power intact, Source Master Almira is feared, but without it, she has a genuine connection to the people around her. Also, I guess it's good we can see through Almira that purging the world of Source didn't mean turning every other sorcerer in the world into silent monks, but then I don't know why that happened to the party. Whatever, this is the good ending where everything works out. But there is a shadow hanging over this ending. Lucian gets away with everything. Dallas gets to ride off into the sunset, and Lucian gets to rule the world. It's only Melody's kindness and effort that allows the party to come back from being silent monks and have their own endings. It is this. The fact that the Purge Source ending invariably hands control of the world over to Lucian that breaks it. If there were a version of this ending where Lucian was dead, or at least dethroned, that you get by defeating him in battle and then purging Source, my feelings about this entire story would be a lot more positive. I would more easily brush over the confusing climax of Nameless Isle, or the weirdly small feeling of arcs. If so much of the game can be considered a treatise on power being corrosive and needing to be abolished, using Source as a broader metaphor, but still showing political power in the same light, suddenly separating political power at the last minute as something more legitimate feels strange, like a thematic betrayal. If we're suddenly supposed to disregard the political power we've seen throughout the game and only consider Source as the bad kind, then the story kind of means nothing. Hey everyone, this thing we've completely made up for the game is bad and shouldn't exist. Okay, cool, glad it doesn't, I guess. This isn't a matter of the game not ultimately agreeing with my own beliefs about power. I don't automatically reject art I disagree with, and I wouldn't even necessarily say my own beliefs match perfectly onto what I've interpreted the game's main points to be anyway. The problem is that the game is fundamentally undermining its own expressed viewpoint. This ending seems meant to be seen as the golden ending. Admittedly, it can be tricky to tell, especially if you're not playing something like Knights of the Old Republic where there's an obvious good and obvious evil ending, but if one ending is described as leading to more peace and prosperity than others, it's probably being favored. Also, if there's an ending that's most in line with the game's broader themes up to that point, that's another big clue. And when a game is part of a series, the metatext of which ending leads into whatever comes next chronologically grants that ending extra legitimacy. fantasy, even if I personally like to think of it more as just one possible future. In Original Sin 2's case, the Purge All Source ending is the only one that can possibly lead to Divinity 2, the next game of the in-universe timeline, in which Lucian is in the role of Divine once again, and is thought dead once again because he was defeated by his son Damien, who reforms the Black Ring after the God King is sealed away. This would all turn out very differently if the whole world is Source-empowered, or if someone totally different is Divine, or the Voidwoken have rampaged over the world, or Source was purged without allowing Lucian to get away scot-free. As I said way back at the beginning, Divinity continuity has historically been very loose, but the Purge Source ending is as close as we get to a canon one. So it seems we're supposed to see this ending as the best. Even the non-ideal resolution for the elves is arguably a better outcome for them than they get in the other possibilities. And the way you achieve this ending, after spending the whole game with the objective of making moral compromises to gain power, and witnessing many examples of vicious cycles of oppression and vengeance, is to choose to break the cycle by giving up that power and removing it from the world so it can never be used to destroy and oppress ever again. The Godwoken have implicitly learned that their own objective was folly, that the power they sought is the problem, and they sacrifice themselves to free and save the world forever. That should be beautiful, but instead Lucian comes back, and the great man we've spent the last part of the game exposing as corrupt and cruel assumes absolute political power and gets to fix the world himself, and it basically works out. This game is making its final conclusion on its 100-hour exploration of power by showing just how much better the world is when you give it up, and then undermines it by, at the same time, carving out an exception for the series' most recurring character. One could argue this is meant to make the ending not so golden, that the moral ambiguity of Lucian regaining power is intended, and we're meant to see this as a problem in the making, but to me it doesn't come across like the intent. Yes, some characters do express doubts about Lucian, like the Red Prince, but these concerns are easily brushed off, and the ending slides present things as hunky-dory. Gareth has become disillusioned with Lucian now that he's recognized his flaws, but rather than dedicating himself to fighting Lucian, or even just carefully watching him, he just decides to wander around to find himself. Gareth, the man you just learned was a cruel false idol, is supreme ruler of the world now. This doesn't feel like the time for a post-grad backpacking trip around the ancient empire or whatever it is you're doing. I don't want to discount the value of Lucian trying to redeem himself by using his regained political power to give reparations to the elves and things like that. At the very least, he seems to be making an earnest effort at repentance, and in a vacuum I appreciate this. But once again, this does not feel in line with the game's depicted philosophy, and this ending's assertion that giving up power is the right thing to do. At this point, it's worth asking, am I just wrong about this game's main theme as I've been describing it for the last 2 hours? If a more matured Lucian can really preside over prosperous world peace, until the events of Divinity 2, and if the Red Prince with dragons or Sebille as New Mother Tree can also rule justly, then we probably are meant to take Malody's earlier statement about how power can be wielded well as long as it's done with balance as the game's true thesis statement. And I've perhaps over-focused on the critiques of power and failed to pay attention to the ways it's shown how power can be wielded responsibly, is what I would say if there were meaningful instances depicting responsible power. Sure, Malody's statement may have theoretical value, but within the context of the game, it feels more like wishful thinking that doesn't reflect how everyone wields power in practice in Rivellon. Same for what characters like Maester Siva have to say on the subject. Original Sin 2 probably is trying to land on supporting power wielded with balance, but I'd say it failed at conveying this because the problems with power are so clearly defined and demonstrated without, ironically, enough balance, that the idea all you need is balance just feels like cope. Up until these ending slides suddenly have things working out. Maybe I have spent this whole time interpreting the game against its true intent, but I maintain that it's gone much further in conveying power bad than it has power just needs balance, and it's way more interesting for having done so. And besides, banishing Source is not an especially balanced thing to do, yet that is the ending with the most positive results for most of the rest of the world. Maybe we're meant to see Source as the thing that's inherently unbalancing, but then we come back to Lucian's return and it's hard to appreciate that possibility. It feels less like the game is endorsing a positive balance of power as much as saying, actually, it's just you who can't wield power well enough to save the world. Lucian is built different. Ignore everything about how we actually wrote him. And that's how Divinity Original Sin 2 ends. Either with an ending that shows the world still torn by strife, thus hammering home that power will inevitably breed conflict, which is at least thematically coherent, or a golden ending that's telling you that the villain was right, and you needed to listen to him and let him get away with everything and keep his power. Cool. I feel so satisfied with this narrative experience. A grand narrative with frustratingly thin characters throughout that stumbles with its most interesting core idea at the last minute. People can learn from their mistakes and grow for the better, individually or as groups. They don't always, but, you know, they can. And for all my criticisms of Divinity Original Sin 2, the fact that it is such a clear, rougher iteration of so many of the same things Baldur's Gate 3 would do gives it an unintended metatextual value as a demonstration of creative iteration and improvement. You can see an evolution in character writing from Red Prince, Lohse, and Sebille to Gale, Astarion, and Shadowheart. Not to say each of those companions are direct analogs for each other, but there are some broad through lines, as we can also see with how familiar NPCs reoccur throughout the journey in both games. Almost all of the original Sin 2 writers worked on Baldur's Gate 3, in addition to newcomers. They honed their skills on this game to create a much richer text later. But of course, as I've gone over in the past, Baldur's Gate 3 isn't perfect either, and has room for improvement in a number of areas. I would hope Larian's writing team is able to learn and grow even more, just like all the rest of Larian's departments. But all of their developers have to know how to do the work themselves, to put the mental rigor in to work through the messy bits, break down what worked and how they did it, to understand iteration by doing it, not mindlessly churning it out. This work cannot be cognitively offloaded if you want to continue this kind of improvement trajectory and make the next Divinity worthy of the implied definitiveness of its title being solely the series' name. As for the game itself, I am glad I ended up going back to give it another chance. It did not win me over, and if I were to do my Revival CRPG story tier list video again, I might be willing to bump it up to a low B, but also might not, and certainly no higher. I found new things to appreciate and new things to criticize, and my hope is that Larian is able to properly apply the lessons learned and talent grown on Baldur's to the new Divinity game. And if they or someone else wanted to try a sort of competitive multiplayer RPG again, I'd love to see that too, but perhaps with a shorter playtime and a plot structure that actually culminates in that competition. Original Sin 2 kind of ended up the worst of both worlds, but is a unique game anyway. It's got fascinating ideas executed somewhat well and somewhat poorly. And story aside, it is very fun to play. Pillars of Eternity 2 was better. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've made it this far. If you have, I assume you liked it enough to want to see more of my stuff, so make sure you press all the engagement buttons and the subscriber notification bell if you haven't already. And thank you once again to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. Joining either one of those gets you access to, at varying levels, exclusive short mini essay posts, private Q&A videos, and script previews for my essays, as well as being listed in the credits. If that seems at all interesting to you and you're feeling generous, I'd be very grateful. Have a good one.